Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. The damp chill that clung to the early morning air was a familiar companion for Helena. She stood at the edge of the dense forest that framed the small settlement where she had spent the last few years, a place far removed from the heart of pack life. She let out a quiet breath, her chest tight with anticipation and an unspoken fear. The towering pines seemed to loom in silent judgment, their branches swaying in a breeze that carried the promise of rain. This was a reminder of the solitude that had defined her existence for so long. She had been raised to live in the shadows of pack territories, never fully accepted, never truly welcomed, and, in some twisted sense, she had come to embrace the isolation. Even if it stung, it was still better than the fury she knew lay just over the horizon, waiting for her in the main packlands. Helena had grown up under her mother's cautious eye and her father's infamous legacy. Her father, Malgrim, was no typical rogue. He had not merely abandoned his own pack, he had brutally taken the lives of the reigning Alpha and Luna many years ago. The memory of that grim night was etched into local lore, shared in hushed whispers among those who recalled the tragedy, and used as a cautionary tale to keep their young ones in line. The previous Alpha and Luna had been respected beyond measure, and their sudden, violent end had shaken the territory to its core. Most believed the crime was fueled by pure malice, but Helena's mother insisted there were reasons they would never share with anyone. Whatever her parents' motivations, the act forced them into lives on the run. Helena, barely more than a baby at the time, had no memory of that event. Yet its shadow continued to follow her, like a cursed inheritance. She could still recall her mother's fervent lessons. "Never trust them," her mother would whisper. "They'll hunt you down if they see any sign of your father in you. They will never forgive what happened, so you must hate them before they hate you." These words, so often repeated, burrowed into Helena's mind, shaping her perspective long before she truly understood what had happened. Resentment, confusion, and fear had all woven together inside her. She came to believe in the inevitability of conflict between her and any who belonged to a formal pack. Even as a child, she had felt the distant tug of the werewolf bond that called all shifters to unite under an alpha's leadership. Yet that call had been drowned out by the anger and shame pounding through her veins. Over time, she had learned to tamp down her own longing for a community. It seemed safer that way. Now, at 19, Helena's solitary life was starting to close in on her. She was no stranger to survival skills. Her mother had died from an illness a few years ago, leaving her no choice but to rely on quick wits and heightened senses to get by. Gathering berries, hunting small prey in her wolf form, and cultivating a careful neutrality with neighboring humans were all part of her routine. Yet every new sunrise brought fresh questions about how much longer she could continue living in the margins. She had never known a stable home, and though she might sneer at the idea of a pack, there was a persistent ache in her chest every time she thought of families gathered around a communal fire, siblings playing under the moon, and couples forging unbreakable bonds. These were luxuries she would never have. At least, that was what she told herself. But fate had a way of drawing lines that no amount of hatred or fear could erase. It happened one overcast morning when she ventured farther than usual in search of food, allowing her wolf form to take over. White-gray fur glistened under the faint sunlight breaking through the canopy, and her bright amber eyes were trained on the paths ahead, scanning for any sign of game. The crisp air sharpened her senses, and her ears twitched at each distant rustle. She was cautious by habit, but hunger drove her deeper into territory she had been careful to avoid. The very lands patrolled by the new alpha of the pack her father had once shattered. The moment she crossed an invisible boundary, her heart gave a terrified flutter. She recognized the mingled scent of wolves moving in patrols, their overlapping trails forming a near-impenetrable perimeter. Her instincts screamed at her to turn around and flee, but hunger forced her to risk it. The prey was more plentiful here, the streams full of fish, and the clearings teeming with deer. So she crept through the underbrush, silently cursing her own recklessness while telling herself she would only take what was necessary before vanishing again. It was in that moment of high tension that she heard a distant howl. It started soft, then grew, rolling through the trees with a resonance that made her fur prickle. That howl carried both a warning and a command. She knew it was from the alpha, a call to gather or to alert his pack. Panic tugged at her chest, and she pressed herself flat against the ground, hidden within a thicket. She tried to hold perfectly still, muzzle to the dirt and ears pinned back, hoping to avoid detection. But the next moment her heightened senses caught another sound, footfalls moving rapidly closer. Wolves, more than one, maybe 2 or 3, were headed in her direction. The patrollers must have picked up her scent. Helena's mind spun with escape routes. If she made a break for the border, she could outrun them, but that would only confirm her presence. If she hunkered down and tried to wait them out, she risked being cornered. Her heart thundered so loudly that it pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to think rationally. With measured caution, she slunk away from the thicker brush and moved through the shadows of taller trees, keeping her paws light against the ground. She hadn't gone far when a low growl sounded behind her. One of the patrol wolves had found her after all. The confrontation was immediate. A male wolf with dark russet fur stood bristling a few yards away, lips peeled back over sharp fangs. Another, a lean female wolf with a silver coat, emerged to his left, tail erect and hackles raised. Helena's own wolf instincts rose in a desperate swirl. She wanted to run, but something in the male's posture told her he would pounce if she made the slightest move. Their hostility was palpable. She recognized it at once. To them, she was an intruder, possibly a threat, and certainly an outsider. Her father's face flickered through her mind, along with all the warnings that had shaped her life. Cold dread clenched her stomach, though she tried not to let it show. She mustered the bravado to bare her own teeth, a warning to stay away, but it was purely defensive. She could sense how the wolves scrutinized her scent. Perhaps they noticed something odd about her, maybe the faint odor of rogue life, or possibly a distant echo of her father's lineage. The story said that an alpha's blood left a lasting imprint, especially when connected to the one who had ended their reign. Whatever it was, she could tell these patrollers did not like it. They growled in low, threatening tones. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves signaled another arrival. Helena tensed, certain it was yet another patrol member. But when the presence stepped forward into the clearing, it made the 2 patrollers dip their heads in submission. A tall, imposing wolf with a black coat, sleek and glossy from careful grooming, emerged. His aura was different, powerful, demanding attention with the subtlety of a coiled tempest. This was the new alpha, the direct successor of the wolves her father had murdered. His name was Xander. Though she had only heard it whispered by passing rogues, she would have given anything to avoid meeting him face to face. But there he was, eyes narrowing as he took in her trembling form. Helena stood frozen. Her instincts commanded her to run, but that intangible authority emanating from him rooted her in place. She shuddered, not just from fear, but from a disturbing warmth that bloomed in her chest. The intimacy of a potential bond flickered there. She had never felt anything like it before, and it threw her off balance. She reminded herself of her mother's cautionary words. Never trust them. Never believe their illusions of compassion. Yet as Xander lifted his head to scent the air, she saw something in his gaze shift. Recognition. Realization. Something primal. A swirl of conflicting emotions passed over his face as he fixed those piercing eyes on her. She tried to steel her heart, telling herself that behind every alpha's seemingly protective stance lay nothing but the raw desire to control. That was what her mother had told her. But it was difficult to hold on to that certainty while his gaze probed deeper, as if trying to decipher her very soul. He let out a low growl of authority, and the patrollers stepped back. The tension in the clearing was excruciating. Helena could practically taste their apprehension, and she knew that any misstep on her part would be catastrophic. She was not so naive as to believe they would let her walk away. They would have questions: who she was, why she was trespassing, and whether she posed a threat. And if they recognized her father's features in her own, or caught some remnant of his scent, it could end right here in violence. Her life would simply be forfeit. Yet the Alpha did not charge. He did not lash out with tooth or claw. Instead, he dipped his head, quietly instructing the others to remain back. They obeyed, though their eyes stayed glued to Helena, every muscle in their bodies poised for attack. Heart pounding, she waited for Xander to bare his fangs and strike, but instead, he shifted. Muscles rippled under dark fur, and with a glowing ripple of power, he took on human form. The patrollers followed suit, though they kept close watch with eyes narrowed in suspicion. Helena remained in her wolf shape, not trusting them enough to lower her guard. Xander now stood tall as a man in his early 20s, broad shoulders draped with the inherent majesty of an alpha. His hair, black as midnight, fell slightly over his forehead, and his eyes, almost the same hue as his wolf's dark amber, fixed on her with an expression that was more complicated than anything she had ever seen. He wore simple patrol gear, a pair of trousers and boots, with a dark shirt that strained against the strength of his build. His posture was composed, unwavering, yet his gaze flickered with something akin to confusion, as though he recognized a significance in her presence that he could not quite put into words. "Shift," he said, his voice resonant with command. "I want to speak with you." Her mind screamed no. She wanted to stay hidden behind the safety of her wolf form, where it was harder for others to read her expressions. But refusing an alpha's direct command was a dangerous move, especially this close to his territory. The patroller stepped closer, ready to enforce his order if necessary. Realizing she had little choice, Helena reluctantly let the energy of the transformation flood through her. Her limbs tingled, bones contorting, fur receding until she stood upright, a young woman with unbound hair that tumbled over her shoulders. She was breathing heavily from the adrenaline, and her amber eyes locked on Xander, refusing to show submission even if fear tore at her insides. "You're trespassing," he said, voice measured. He studied her, possibly trying to gauge her reaction. "Are you alone?" The question held an edge of suspicion. And yet, beneath it, Helena discerned a note of something else. Concern, maybe. It unsettled her. Alphas rarely displayed genuine compassion toward rogues. She swallowed hard. Her instincts told her to lie. But the memory of her father's crime and her mother's lessons paralyzed her. If she lied clumsily, she risked immediate violence. If she told the truth, she could spark even more hostility. So she hesitated, meeting the alpha's gaze with difficulty. "I didn't mean to cross into your territory," she managed, keeping her voice steady. "I was only looking for food." He studied her face, and she could almost see the puzzle pieces assembling in his mind. The patrol wolves glanced at Xander, awaiting further instructions. One of them, the silver-haired female, sniffed the air. She scowled, stepping closer to Helena, as if trying to identify the scent that clung to her. Helena's heart nearly gave out. If this wolf recognized Malgrim's bloodline, everything might fall apart in an instant. Xander held up a hand, and the patroller retreated, eyes still alight with suspicion. He let his own gaze drift over Helena's features, her high cheekbones, the shape of her eyes, the tension in her posture. She wondered if he could read the inheritance of her father's sins stamped into her face. If so, he gave no immediate indication. Instead, he said, "You are on Pack lands without permission. That is enough to hold you for trespassing. I should take you to our holding cells while I determine what to do with you." She couldn't hide the flash of alarm in her eyes. A cold sweat broke out across her brow. She had heard horror stories about rogues being tortured for the crime of stepping on Pack territory. She tensed, ready to fight if necessary, though she knew 3 trained wolves would make short work of her. But before this standoff could escalate further, something unexpected happened. She felt a jolt in her chest, like a shockwave from an unseen force, and sensed a chord of resonance pass between her and the alpha. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, as though he experienced it too. The patrollers visibly exchanged questioning looks, clearly picking up on their alpha's sudden shift in demeanor. Xander took a step closer, his expression torn between disbelief and some deeper, primal recognition. Helena's breath caught in her throat. The feeling was exhilarating and terrifying at once, like her heart was being pulled toward him against all reason. She forced herself to break eye contact, but the invisible tether didn't vanish. It had snared both of them in a silent, chaotic moment that neither fully understood. Without quite realizing she was doing it, Helena found herself recalling bits of lore about mates, how each wolf had a fated partner chosen by the moon's mysterious design, how that bond could transcend hatred and prejudice. She had never believed in such fairy tales, dismissing them as illusions. Now that bizarre spark of connection nearly sent her to her knees. She reminded herself. This alpha was the son of the 2 wolves her father had murdered. Their families were entangled in a decades-old feud dripping with blood. How could they possibly share a mate bond? The mere thought was madness. Xander cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. He shot a glance at his patrollers, who frowned, confused by his sudden hesitation. He didn't announce his suspicion aloud, as if he feared giving voice to something that might unravel the delicate order of his pack. Instead, he quietly said, "Let's bring her in peacefully. I need to talk to her privately. No one is to harm her, understood?" His tone left no room for argument. The patrollers nodded curtly, though they stared at Helena with fresh curiosity, clearly sensing a change in their alpha's aura. Helena felt her pulse hammering, sweat slicking the back of her neck. She had prayed for a swift escape, but now she found herself in a predicament beyond anything she could have imagined. Her mind whirled, searching for a way out, a plan that would keep her father's identity buried. But the alpha's gaze held her like a vise. She sensed that any attempt to flee would lead to immediate capture. Moreover, her wolf side was so disoriented by the sudden flush of attraction and recognition that she doubted she could outrun them with the same cold precision that guided her a few minutes ago. Xander gestured for her to follow, leading the way back toward the heart of his territory. But the trawlers fell in behind her, effectively barring any route of escape. As they walked through the forest's winding paths, Helena tried to ignore the intangible thread drawing her attention to the Alpha's presence. She focused instead on memorizing landmarks, calculating distances, and listening for changes in the sounds around them. If an opportunity arose, she would need every scrap of information to survive. Yet the steady drumbeat in her chest reminded her that the true danger might not lie in the threat of imprisonment, but in the unknown bond swirling between her and this man she was meant, by all her upbringing, to despise. The journey felt long. Each step took her closer to the Central Pack settlement, a place she had seen only from afar. Once the trees began to thin, she saw neat clusters of cabins and larger communal buildings, all nestled in a valley guarded by rolling hills. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the distant laughter of pack children playing drifted on the breeze. Helena's heart clenched with an emotion she couldn't name, an odd mixture of envy and grief. She quickly averted her gaze, reminding herself that this world wasn't for her. She belonged outside its boundaries. But that was before. Now she had stepped inside, guided by an Alpha who exuded both power and a lingering sense of shock. As they reached the main clearing, a few pack members halted their tasks, looking on with blatant curiosity. Some lowered their heads respectfully to Xander, while others eyed Helena with open distrust. Voices murmured, "Roga, and who's that girl?" drifting through the space in hushed tones. Helena's cheeks flushed, and her old resentments, the ones she had carried like armor, threatened to surge to the surface. Let them judge, she told herself. They would never understand what it meant to grow up in the aftermath of a crime they all hated her father for. She refused to look away, meeting every hostile glare with quiet defiance. Soon, Xander led her into a large structure near the center of the settlement. It resembled a communal hall or gathering place, built of sturdy logs with carved decorations that suggested an appreciation for tradition. The interior was surprisingly warm, with a large fireplace crackling along one wall. She noticed a long wooden table, big enough to seat dozens, presumably where the Alpha and his closest advisors convened. A few pack members stood around, whispering questions to each other. But Xander waved them off, and they scattered, leaving just him, Helena, and two patrollers who remained by the door. He turned to them, his voice calmer now. "Wait outside. I'll call for you if I need anything." They hesitated, the male wolf from earlier opening his mouth to protest. One glance from the Alpha silenced him. Bowing their heads, they obeyed, closing the door behind them. Helena was left standing in the center of the vast hall, feeling uncomfortably exposed. Xander moved around her, his steps echoing on the wooden floor. She could sense his gaze traveling across her features again, searching for answers in the lines of her face. "Who are you?" he asked at last, and there was no menace in his tone, just a genuine need to know. "You have the scent of a rogue, yes, but there's something else. The air around you is different." He seemed to struggle to find the right words to explain the bond that crackled between them. Helena's mouth felt dry, her mind racing. She swallowed, a reflex that did nothing to quell the dryness in her throat. "I've lived on the outskirts my entire life," she said, choosing her words carefully. "My parents left their pack before I was old enough to remember it. I don't belong anywhere." She tried to keep her voice steady, but she could hear the bitterness creeping in. The truth was so tangled with secrets that she wasn't sure how much she dared reveal. Xander took another step, the distance between them shrinking. Her heart thudded in her chest, unaccustomed to being so close to another werewolf, especially the one whose parents had been slain by her father. She fought to keep her composure. "You're not telling me everything," he said softly. "I sense the fear rolling off you. Are you afraid of me? Or is there something else that terrifies you even more?" She looked away, pretending to examine the carved wolf heads adorning the rafters. "If you're going to lock me up for trespassing, just do it," she said. "That's what your pack wants, right?" Another rogue in chains, kept out of sight. His jaw tightened. "It's true that we punish trespassing, but you hardly sound like a cold-blooded threat. And I'm not in the habit of jailing every rogue who steps over our borders. That kind of cruelty breeds chaos." He paused, considering her carefully. "Something tells me you're more than just a hungry wanderer." His voice took on a gentler note. "You're trembling." She realized too late that her hands were shaking. The swirl of dread, anger, and that unsettling pull toward him converged, threatening to topple her defenses. She clenched her fists, willing herself to breathe evenly. She had to protect her father's secret and guard her own heart. "You don't know me," she said, the words sharper than she intended. "And you don't want to know me. Believe me." Surprise flickered across his face. Before he could respond, the door cracked open, and an older woman with rich brown hair stepped inside. She paused, eyes flicking between Helena and the Alpha, taking in the tension. Helena guessed this woman was likely an influential member of the pack, maybe an advisor or caretaker. "Alpha," the woman said quietly, her tone respectful but urgent. "The rest of the pack has heard that you brought in a rogue. They're uneasy. Some are demanding to know if it's related to the rogues that have been spotted near the border before." Xander's lips pressed into a thin line. "Assure everyone that I'm handling the situation. There's no immediate threat. I'll speak to them soon." The woman nodded, and then looked Helena over more thoroughly, as if trying to read the truth in her posture. Her gaze was sharp but not unkind. She finally withdrew, closing the door again, leaving them alone once more. The Alpha seemed torn. He turned back to Helena. "I need to address my pack," he said, a touch of regret in his voice. "They've been on edge since rogues threatened one of our outlying farms. We can't afford panic." He gave her a searching look, as if trying to peel back the layers of her guarded expression. "If I'm wrong to trust you, I'll pay for that mistake. But something tells me you're not here to harm us. If you promise you won't run, I'll keep you in a private room rather than the cells. Will you give me your word?" She almost laughed at the irony. She, the daughter of Malgrim, the murderer of his parents, being asked to make a simple promise. Her mind screamed at her to seize the chance to escape, to break free at the first opportunity. But there was a small, traitorous part of her that wanted to see where this bond would lead, and she hated herself for it. The conflict carved lines of tension into her features. At last, she nodded stiffly. "Fine," she said. "I promise I won't run for now." It was the best answer she could give. He exhaled, relief evident in the slight droop of his shoulders. Then he gestured toward the hall's broad exit. "I'll have someone take you to a guest room in the main house. Once I've reassured the pack, we'll talk more." His eyes flickered with something unspoken. "We have a lot to talk about." She said nothing, merely followed the gesture. Before she crossed the threshold, a single thought pulsed through her mind. If he discovered her identity, if he realized that he was standing face to face with the daughter of the man who destroyed his family, the tenuous peace between them would shatter, and no strange bond would survive that revelation. She swallowed the knot in her throat, pushing the thought away. Outside, the patrollers flanked her again, but this time their stance was less threatening, more curious than hostile. As they led her through the pack settlement, the stares intensified. Whispers carried on the wind. Speculation and suspicion threaded through every hushed remark. Helena kept her chin up, refusing to be cowed by their scrutiny. even though her heart hammered in her chest. She told herself she was only staying to avoid immediate danger, to find an opening to escape, but some deep part of her questioned whether that was entirely true. They eventually reached a building attached to the side of the main communal hall. It appeared sturdier than the smaller cabins scattered around, with a front porch overlooking a cultivated garden. A younger pack member, perhaps no older than 16, opened the door with wide eyes. The patrollers exchanged a few clipped words with the youth, instructing him to ensure Helena was settled in a guest room and that she remained inside. The young boy nodded fervently, glancing at her with both awe and a tinge of wariness. Inside, Helena found a modest bedroom with a small bed, a wooden dresser, and a curtained window overlooking the settlement's communal courtyard. She stood there, the door closing behind her, the key turning in the lock from the outside. Her shoulders sagged at the soft click. Even though it wasn't the dungeon, it was still a prison of sorts. She stared at the window, gauging whether she could leap out and make a run for it. But she was too high up to land quietly, and the courtyard was wide open, in plain sight of any watchers. For now, she was stuck. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she let out a shaky breath, the gravity of the day's events pressing down on her. She had been captured, spared from immediate violence, and locked in this room, all under the watch of a man she was taught to hate. More disturbingly, there was a spark, an undeniable thread, linking them. She recalled the stories of the mate bond, how it could ignite in an instant, forging a connection as unbreakable as it was mysterious. Could it really be that the moon would choose two enemies to share such a bond? The notion was cruel, as if the heavens were toying with them. But even as her logical mind rebelled, her heart did not deny the pull she felt. Xander, with his commanding presence and the unspoken compassion that flickered in his eyes, was nothing like the monster she had envisioned in her childhood nightmares. When he had spoken to her, she sensed not only an alpha's rightful suspicion, but also a genuine curiosity. It was as if he saw a potential for redemption in her. That thought made her stomach churn with guilt, for she knew he would hate her if he learned the truth. She could almost hear her mother's voice warning her to keep up her guard, to remember that pack wolves were cunning and deceitful. Yet she wondered if perhaps her mother's warnings were colored by bitterness and grief, if maybe she had been raised to fear an entire pack based on a single catastrophic event. Pacing the small room, Helena tried to steady her racing thoughts. Her father's face loomed in her memory, his grizzled features twisted with rage as he told her about the so-called injustices he endured under the previous Alpha's leadership. He had claimed he was forced to commit that heinous act, that there was no other choice. Her mother had always been hesitant to discuss it in detail, allowing Helena to fill in the blanks with her own imagination. But from the perspective of an outsider looking in, there was no excuse for the bloodshed. Even if Malgrim had been wronged somehow, it would never justify taking 2 lives, and not just any lives, but those of a beloved Alpha and Luna. Time trickled by. Through the window she watched as pack members went about their day. Some carried lumber, others tended gardens, and a few young ones chased each other in circles, yapping excitedly in their half-shifted forms. Despite her anxiety, she felt an ache of longing. She had been on the run, or living in isolation, for so long that a sense of community was foreign to her. Yet watching them interact so naturally, she felt a pang of jealousy. She forced herself to look away. She could not afford to be seduced by their sense of belonging. Her thoughts spun to Xander. How was he handling this situation? He was probably addressing his pack, reassuring them that he had the rogue under control. She wondered if he would reveal that there was something unusual about her. Surely he felt it too. The mate pull was not something that only one wolf sensed. Did he think it was some mistake? Or was he wrestling with a betrayal he couldn't voice? Maybe he feared how his pack would react if they discovered that their alpha's mate, of all people, was a rogue. Especially a rogue who might carry the bloodline of the murderer responsible for the greatest tragedy this territory had ever known. A knock on the door startled her out of her reverie. Helena tensed, calling on her wolf's energy, prepared to defend herself. The door opened, and the brown-haired woman who had interrupted earlier stepped inside, holding a small tray with a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. She moved slowly, as if trying not to spook a cornered animal. Setting the tray on the dresser, she turned to Helena. "I brought you something to eat," she said, carefully kind. "I'm Ingrid, one of the caretakers here. The Alpha asked me to make sure you're all right." She paused, taking in Helena's guarded stance. "You must be scared. I would be too, in your situation. But we're not savages. You'll be treated fairly." Helena swallowed back a retort. Part of her wanted to shout that she wasn't afraid, that she could hold her own against any of them. Another part of her yearned to believe the woman's words. She said nothing, merely eyed the food. Ingrid gently pushed the tray closer. "Go on," she encouraged. "Eat while it's still warm. You're not doing yourself any favors by starving." Reluctantly, Helena reached for the spoon. She tasted the soup, and her eyes widened. Flavor burst across her tongue, and a warmth spread through her chest as she realized how hungry she truly was. She ate in silence, conscious of Ingrid observing her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The woman spoke again, her voice quiet. "I don't know the details, but the Alpha seems unsettled. He wouldn't bring a rogue into the heart of our territory unless something about you convinced him it was necessary. Whatever it is, you must understand that our pack has suffered a lot. We've been on edge for years, ever since Claude." Her words trailed off, as if referencing the old tragedy was too painful. Helena's heart thudded. She set the bowl down with trembling fingers, swallowing the remnants of the soup. Ingrid's gaze softened. "I'm not trying to pry. But if you have information that can help ease the pack's fears, or if you're innocent of any wrongdoing, it'll be easier if you're straightforward. Our Alpha isn't cruel by nature. He'll see reason if there is any to be found." A swirl of conflicting emotions collided inside Helena. She wanted to believe that, but she also knew how quickly reason would vanish the moment her lineage was revealed. "I don't have any answers that would make things easier," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Ingrid sighed. "Then I'll leave you to rest. The Alpha will come for you soon, I'm sure." She offered a final look of cautious empathy before slipping out the door. When Helena was alone again, she let out a ragged breath. She slumped onto the bed, exhaustion spreading through her limbs. Too many revelations, too many secrets weighing her down. Even though she wanted to stay alert, her eyelids felt like lead. Hunger, fear, and the lingering aftermath of adrenaline drained her energy. She fought it, but eventually sleep claimed her. In her dreams, she was a frightened pup again, hiding in the shadows while howls of rage and grief filled the night air. A dark silhouette, her father, towered above her, a menacing growl on his lips, as he demanded she never forget who her enemies were. Then a new figure, black fur glistening under moonlight, stepped between her and the darkness, eyes shining with power and something akin to compassion. Conflicting emotions churned, and even in slumber, she felt her heart pounding at the possibility of an impossible bond. She awoke to the soft sound of voices in the hall. The window showed that late afternoon light had turned the courtyard to gold, marking how much time had passed. Helena stretched, her muscles stiff from tension. She realized with mild embarrassment that she had dozed off without meaning to. Now a renewed spike of anxiety coursed through her. Had the Alpha announced to the pack who she was? Was he still uncertain? Did the entire settlement already loathe her for reasons they didn't fully understand? Her questions were partially answered when the door opened to reveal Xander. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him without locking it, and regarded her with the intense focus she was quickly coming to associate with him. There was a subtle shift in his posture, a controlled urgency, as if he had faced a chorus of demands and concerns from his pack, and had barely managed to slip away to see her. She rose from the bed, heart hammering, uncertain how to greet him. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, searching her face as though it held the key to an unsolved puzzle. "The pack is uneasy," he said, keeping his voice low. "I told them I'd handle your case personally, that I'd decide how to proceed once I learned more about you." He shook his head slowly, brows drawing together. "I don't even know your name." She flinched. The simplest truths felt like a risk. Finally, she said quietly, "Helena." "Helena," he repeated, testing the syllables. Then he walked closer, standing within arm's length. She fought every instinct urging her to retreat. The faint scent of pine clung to him, and she realized with a jolt that it stirred something deep within her, something primal. "I have to ask you this, Helena," he said, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Have you done anything to harm my pack? Are you working with any rogues who want to bring trouble here?" She forced herself to look him in the eye, letting him see her indignation. "I came here alone, and if I had wanted to attack, I wouldn't be caught so easily," she retorted, which was partially true. Her father had trained her well enough in stealth that she could have avoided detection, had hunger not made her careless. He studied her for a moment, then gave a thoughtful nod. "That's what I told the others. You don't strike me as the type to orchestrate an ambush. But they want reassurance. They remember past tragedies." She felt a pang of guilt twist in her gut. "I had nothing to do with that," she whispered. Technically not a lie. She was only a child when her father committed those crimes. But shame threatened to suffocate her. He tilted his head, his expression gentle. "I believe you." The quiet admission hung in the air, and she felt something in her chest ache with gratitude. But he took another step forward, bridging the distance until she could practically feel the warmth emanating from him. "Yet there's more, something I can't quite grasp. The pull I feel toward you. It goes beyond empathy or curiosity. Do you understand what I'm talking about?" She swallowed, refusing to let herself tremble. "I might," she said, "but it doesn't change anything. If you're trying to claim I'm your mate," the word trembled on her tongue, "then you're mistaken." His jaw clenched. "I felt it in the forest, Helena, and I feel it even more now. Our wolves are responding to each other. Tell me you don't sense it." She wanted to deny it, to brazenly declare he was imagining things. But the strange magnetism hummed between them like a taut wire, undeniable. She turned away, arms wrapping around herself in a self-protective gesture. "It can't be what you think," she murmured. "Sometimes there are illusions, false bonds that trick the senses. Our families were not meant to be." She trailed off, stopping short of revealing the deeper truth. He let out a low breath, stepping back to give her space. "I've spent my entire life training to be the Alpha. I know the difference between illusions and the real bond. And this is real. I don't understand the meaning of it, or why fate would be so cruel as to present it now. But I can't deny it." Sorrow laced his voice. "If you reject me, it'll cause strife. Even a partial bond is strong enough to shake an alpha to his core. But I can't force you to accept something you despise. I wouldn't be worthy of leading if I did. Helena pressed her lips together, feeling the weight of his words. She understood enough about werewolf customs to know that an alpha's mate was typically revered, not reviled. Yet, if the pack ever discovered her father's identity, she doubted they would be so accepting. Despair churned in her chest. She had spent years despising pack life, blaming them for the tragedy that had exiled her family. Now this man, this alpha whose parents were victims of her father, was standing before her, calmly offering acceptance if only she would trust him. It was too twisted to make sense. She forced herself to meet his gaze again, pushing away the guilt that threatened to choke her. "I'm not sure what you want me to say," he sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "For now, I want you to stay here. Earn the pack's trust. At the very least, prove to them that you're not a danger." His eyes flickered with determination. "If you can do that, maybe we'll have the chance to understand whatever this bond means." His words hung in the air for a long, silent moment. Helena knew the storm was only beginning. Even if she managed to navigate this precarious truce, the truth about her heritage hovered like a thundercloud on the horizon. She nodded reluctantly, figuring that stalling for time was her best option. Escaping might be possible later, when the pack's guard lowered, and a tiny voice in her head admitted that some part of her, the part that yearned for connection, wanted to see if this fragile hope could actually lead somewhere. Xander turned to leave, pausing at the door. "I'll send for you later, once the pack meeting is done and I've settled everyone. We'll see about letting you out of this room under supervision, so you can at least breathe fresh air." He tried for a faint smile, but it was overshadowed by the weight of responsibility etched on his face. When he was gone, Helena sank onto the bed, her mind in turmoil. She could still feel the tingle where their eyes had locked, an echo of the electric bond they both felt. Was it truly fate, or was it a cruel joke designed to expose her father's sins in the most devastating way possible? She buried her face in her hands, forcing herself to slow her breathing. Whatever answer lay ahead, she sensed it would demand every ounce of courage, cunning, and honesty she possessed, and she wasn't at all sure she had enough of any of those qualities to survive what was coming next. Late evening descended on the pack settlement, draping the world in deep blues and purples. Helena stood in the guest room at the window, gazing out at lanterns flickering around the communal courtyard below. She could see groups of werewolves conversing, their silhouettes shifting as they paced or gestured. Their voices rose and fell like waves breaking on a distant shore. She couldn't make out their words, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Somehow, she sensed she was at the center of their concerns. The door opened quietly behind her, and she turned to see Ingrid entering once more. The caretaker carried a small lamp, setting it on a table to cast a soft, warm glow. Ingrid gave her a polite nod, then said, "The Alpha has asked me to bring you to the courtyard. He wants to introduce you in a more formal way so the pack doesn't let rumors run rampant. He thinks it's best for everyone if you show your face and answer a few simple questions." Helena's throat tightened. She had never been a part of something like this, an official pack gathering. Being dragged before them to be scrutinized was the last thing she wanted. But Ingrid's gaze held a silent urgency. Resistance would likely only inflame the pack's distrust. She inhaled slowly, summoning a calm she didn't truly feel. "All right," she murmured. "I'll come." She followed Ingrid down a narrow hallway that opened into a larger corridor, illuminated by lamps set into sconces. The walls were decorated with tapestries depicting the pack's history. Wolves howling under full moons, heroic alphas standing guard over their territory, and various symbols that presumably held deep meaning to the pack. Helena felt a pang of unease at how grand and foreign it all looked compared to her own humble existence on the fringes. Each step echoed underfoot, almost like a drumbeat heralding some inevitable reckoning. They emerged into the cool night air, stepping onto a wooden porch overlooking the courtyard. Dozens of pack members had gathered, forming a semicircle around a small raised platform. Torchlight flickered across faces set in lines of tension and curiosity. Helena could practically feel their gazes burning into her. Her wolf bristled under the scrutiny, urging her to keep her head high, even though her instincts screamed at her to flee. Xander stood at the center of the platform. He wore a dark sleeveless vest that revealed powerful arms, and the confident stance of an alpha claiming his rightful place. His expression was somber yet resolute. As Ingrid led Helena toward him, the crowd parted reluctantly, making space for her to climb onto the platform. She forced her shoulders back, trying not to betray how her heart pounded. The alpha's eyes flicked to hers, offering a brief nod of encouragement before turning to address the assembled wolves. "Many of you have heard by now that I found a trespasser in our territory," he began, voice carrying easily through the stillness of the night. "Her name is Helena, and she came here alone, unarmed. She does not appear to pose any threat to us." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Helena spotted the russet-furred patroller from earlier, now in human form, standing near the front with arms crossed over his chest, eyes narrowed. Beside him stood the silver-haired female who had snarled at Helena in the forest. Their distrust was evident, and it sparked an answering flare of defensiveness in Helena's chest. Xander raised a hand to quiet them. "I'm aware we've had conflicts with rogues before, but I believe in giving an individual the chance to prove their intentions. Helena has agreed to remain among us under supervision until we determine whether she poses any danger. I expect you to treat her fairly. Our pack will not grow stronger by punishing someone who may be innocent." An uneasy silence filled the courtyard. Finally, a middle-aged man with streaks of gray in his hair spoke up. "Alpha," he said respectfully, "I understand you want to show mercy, but have you forgotten how we lost members to rogue attacks in the past? Why should we trust her if she can't tell us anything about her past or her family?" The direct question made Helena's breath catch. She felt the weight of dozens of stares landing on her again. Xander's expression flickered, but he nodded for her to respond. She wet her lips, forcing her voice not to shake. "I've survived mostly alone," she said, carefully choosing her words. "My father was a rogue, yes, but I left him long ago. I'm not part of any pack. I came here by mistake, looking for food. I don't want trouble." None of it was an outright lie, but it left out all the incriminating details. She could feel the tension coiling tighter as she spoke. Another wolf, a woman with a short-cropped haircut, stepped forward, her eyes hard. "That might be true, but how do we know you won't turn on us? Rogues are known to be unpredictable, even dangerous." Helena bristled at the insult, but she held her tongue. Before she could muster a response, Xander's voice cut through the noise, calm but firm. "That's why we'll keep her under watch. If she shows any sign of aggression, I'll address it immediately. But until then, I will not tolerate hostility toward her without cause. Is that understood?" His tone left no room for argument. Some in the crowd bowed their heads, conceding to his authority, while others exchanged worried glances. Sensing the delicate mood, Xander continued, "She's offered her word that she won't harm anyone. She is our guest, not our prisoner. Over the next few days, I encourage each of you to judge her through observation, not rumor or blind fear. His gaze swept the gathered wolves, challenging them to defy him. No one openly objected, though the undercurrent of suspicion was still evident. The assembly gradually broke apart, murmuring in subdued clusters. Helena exhaled in relief, though her heart still pounded. She felt exposed, like prey standing in the heart of a predator's den. Yet, as Xander left the platform and approached her, there was warmth in his eyes, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't completely alone in this. "Come," he said gently. "There's a fire pit behind the hall where some of our members gather to eat. I thought you might join them for dinner, show them you're willing to be part of the community." Her stomach was in knots, but she realized she couldn't hide away forever. If she wanted to earn any measure of trust, at least enough to move freely and eventually plan an escape, she had to make an effort. Nodding, she followed him to a wide clearing behind the largest hall. A communal fire crackled in a stone pit, encircled by sturdy benches. The aroma of roasted meat and root vegetables wafted through the crisp night air. Several pack members were already seated, chatting in low voices, but they quieted when Helena arrived, their gazes flicking uncertainly between her and the alpha. Xander gestured for her to sit on an empty bench. She did so, trying not to meet the curious stares head-on. He sat beside her, a silent statement of support or possession, she wasn't sure which. A younger wolf, perhaps in her late teens, nervously offered Helena a wooden bowl filled with stew, her eyes alight with apprehensive curiosity. "Here," she said, voice quiet but not unkind. "It's my mother's recipe, if you'd like to try." Helena accepted it with a small nod of thanks, forcing a tight smile. The stew smelled delicious, and she realized that, once again, she was ravenous. She took a cautious bite. Rich flavors exploded on her tongue, the warmth of the broth mingling with tender pieces of meat and vegetables. It was one of the best meals she had tasted in years. Despite her tension, she found herself eating more eagerly than she expected, though she tried to maintain a polite demeanor. The young wolf who had offered it smiled slightly before moving away to sit with friends, who immediately whispered in her ear. Conversations resumed around the circle. Helena caught snippets of talk about the approaching winter, about how the pack planned to handle gatherings under the full moon. Occasionally, someone threw a glance her way, murmuring speculation about her origins. She felt like an exotic animal on display, but at least no one was openly hostile. Xander occasionally chimed in with remarks about pack news, a steady presence that kept the atmosphere from becoming too strained. A small sense of normalcy settled over the gathering, tentative but real. Midway through the meal, the russet-haired controller approached, bowl in hand. He did not sit, instead standing near Helena with a measured stare. "I'm Brent," he said, voice clipped. "I was the one who found you in the forest earlier, in case you forgot." She remembered the sight of his bared teeth and bristling fur vividly. Setting aside her bowl, she cleared her throat. "I remember," he huffed softly. "I don't trust you, but if the Alpha says we have to give you a chance, then that's what I'll do. Don't make me regret it." He glanced at Xander, who gave him a curt nod. Then he took a seat nearby, still watching Helena out of the corner of his eye. Xander leaned in to speak quietly. "Brent lost a close friend to a rogue pack years ago. He's been wary ever since. Don't take it personally." Helena suppressed a flare of indignation, reminding herself that many in this pack had reason to be on guard. After a moment, she managed a hushed reply. "I don't blame him." She cast her gaze around the circle, noting how these wolves interacted. Their loyalty to one another was tangible, built on a foundation of shared experiences and mutual care. She could almost taste the belonging that threaded through them all, a concept that had always been out of reach for her. When the meal ended, some of the pack members got up to clear away the remains of dinner, while others lingered by the fire, chatting and occasionally casting curious glances at Helena. Sensing her unease, Xander suggested they take a short walk around the edge of the settlement. It was a surprisingly considerate gesture, giving her a break from the intense atmosphere. She agreed, grateful for the chance to breathe more freely. They strolled side by side along a narrow pathway lined with tall pines that whispered in the gentle breeze. The moon hung low, casting silver light on the path. Helena inhaled the night air, trying to soothe her nerves. Eventually, she glanced at Xander, whose expression remained thoughtful. "Thanks," she said softly, "for not forcing me into a cage or something worse." He looked at her, and she noticed how the moonlight traced the angles of his face, highlighting the quiet determination in his eyes. "I told you before, I don't punish without cause. And whatever your secrets, I sense there's more good in you than you realize." His words sent a rush of conflicting emotions through her. Gratitude, shame, and fear mingled uneasily. She thought about how he was the new alpha, tasked with upholding the legacy his parents had left behind. If he had any inkling that Malgrim's daughter stood beside him, he would probably react with horror. That knowledge felt like a burning coal in her chest, weighing her down. They continued walking, the silence between them thick with unresolved tension. Her mind drifted to the mate bond. How every step she took beside him made the air buzz with an undercurrent of awareness. She forced herself to concentrate on the surroundings, the soft crunch of gravel beneath her feet, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle rustle of branches high overhead. Yet she couldn't fully ignore the magnetic pull that made her acutely conscious of his presence. Eventually, they reached a small overlook behind the settlement, where the ground sloped down to reveal a valley lit by moonlight. The view was beautiful, and Helena felt a surprising sense of peace wash over her. Xander leaned against a tree trunk, crossing his arms. "I want to know more about you," he said, his voice a quiet rumble in the stillness. "But I don't want to pry if you're not ready to talk." She inhaled slowly, the weight of all her lies pressing on her. "My mother died a few years ago," she admitted, deciding to share a small truth. "I've been on my own since then. My father was not someone I want to be around." That, too, was technically not a lie. Malgrim was dangerous, and she had no desire to follow in his bloody footsteps. Xander nodded, empathy flashing in his eyes. "I lost my parents, too. A long time ago." He paused, and she felt her stomach twist. If only he knew the link between their losses. It was hard, growing up without them. Even as an alpha, I still feel the absence. But the pack stepped in. They became my family, teaching me what it means to be a leader, a protector. His honesty tugged at her heart. Here he was, unknowingly extending understanding to the daughter of the man who had stolen those parents from him. She looked away, battling the urge to confess. But she knew that revealing the truth now would only lead to chaos. "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "what it would have been like to grow up in a pack that actually cared. Maybe things would be different." He studied her face. "They could be different now," he offered quietly. "If you wanted a place here, I'd be willing to give you that chance." Her chest tightened. She recognized the sincerity in his voice. And she hated that she couldn't accept it without betraying everything she'd been taught, everything she feared. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally, forcing her voice not to waver. "But I'm not sure it's that simple." He hesitated, then stepped closer. The soft glow of moonlight reflected in his dark eyes. "No, "It's not simple," he agreed. "But I've learned that the greatest bonds are rarely born from simplicity." The tension between them pulsed, an invisible current that made Helena's breath hitch. For a fleeting moment, she imagined leaning into him, letting herself believe that fate had bound them together for some higher purpose. But reality cut through that fantasy like a knife. The secret she carried was too vast, too damning. She forced a half-smile, stepping back slightly. "It's getting late," she said. "We should probably head back." A flicker of disappointment crossed his features, but he nodded. Together, they retraced their steps to the settlement. The path felt heavier now, weighed down by unspoken truths. When they reached the guest quarters, Xander turned to her. "Rest if you can. Tomorrow, I'll arrange for you to meet more of the pack. Maybe help around the settlement. It'll be a good way to prove you're not a threat." Right, she said, looking down, not trusting herself to meet his quate. "Days. Good night." He lifted a hand in a silent gesture of farewell, then strode away, his powerful form soon swallowed by the shadows. Helena entered her room and let out a shaky breath once the door was shut. The flicker of a single lamp danced across the wooden walls, casting wavering shapes. She locked the door, pressing her back against it. Her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Guilt, confusion, a buried longing that made her chest ache. Why had fate orchestrated such a brutal twist? Why choose her, the daughter of a rogue who committed unspeakable violence, to be the mate of the alpha whose family had suffered most from that crime? She had never felt comfortable in her skin, haunted by her father's sins, but this made it so much worse. She was caught between warring loyalties, her ingrained hatred for pack life, and the stirring hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in this world after all. She moved to the window, gazing at the moon now high in the sky. 1,000 questions echoed in her mind, each one heavier than the last. Tomorrow, she would step into the pack's daily life under watchful eyes. Some would be curious, others hostile. She would have to maintain composure, pretend that her father's blood did not taint her. And all the while, she would be near Xander, feeling that unrelenting pull between them. Would she be strong enough to resist it? Or would she even want to? Helena closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cool glass. Despite her weariness, she doubted she would find sleep easily tonight. The entire settlement might be at rest, but her thoughts were in turmoil, an inner storm for which there was no immediate calm. She could almost hear her father's voice echoing from the past, condemning the pack, reminding her that these wolves were the enemy. Yet she also recalled the kindness in Ingrid's eyes, the warmth of the stew she'd been given, and the unwavering resolve of the alpha who had chosen not to cast her out. She opened her eyes to the moonlight, feeling as if the pale glow was beckoning her to make a choice, that she had no idea what that choice should be. A single tear slid down her cheek, the first sign of the tension and conflict that tore at her heart. She brushed it away angrily, reminding herself that she could not afford to show vulnerability. Not now, when so much was at stake. As the night stretched on, Helena forced herself to lie down on the bed. The quiet of the pack settlement enveloped her, punctuated only by the occasional distant howl or the rustle of a breeze through the nearby pines. She stared at the ceiling, haunted by the knowledge that soon someone might piece together her real identity. When that happened, the fragile rapport she had started to build would undoubtedly crumble. And where would that leave her, caught between the unbreakable pull of a mate bond and the unyielding weight of her father's legacy? She closed her eyes, summoning the memory of her mother's gentle touch. If her mother were still alive, what would she say about this impossible predicament? Perhaps she would urge Helena to stay hidden, never revealing the truth. Perhaps she would insist that all alphas were the same, prepared to kill rogues at the first sign of weakness. But perhaps she would also see the flicker of hope in Xander's eyes and advise Helena not to let fear define her future. Somewhere, beyond the swirl of emotion, exhaustion finally claimed her. She drifted off into restless dreams in which she ran through mist-shrouded forests, pursued by both her father's accusing stare and the silent presence of the Alpha's wolf. At times she felt Xander's protective warmth at her side, only for it to vanish when she tried to reach for it. She woke repeatedly, each time convinced that dawn must be near, only to find the night still clinging to the world. Eventually, the sky began to lighten, a gentle gradient of pale blue spreading across the eastern horizon. Helena pushed herself upright, rubbing her eyes. She had slept in fits and starts, her mind too anxious for true rest. But a new day had come, and with it the daunting task of facing the pack under closer scrutiny. She rose, smoothing out her rumpled clothes, wishing she had something clean to wear. A knock came at the door just as she was finishing, and Ingrid's familiar voice drifted in from the hallway. "Helena, may I come in?" She crossed the room and opened the door a crack, peering out warily. Ingrid stood there with a folded set of simple garments in her hands, her expression kind but reserved. "I thought you might like a change of clothes. The Alpha wants you to join some of the others for morning chores, so you can get to know them better." Helena accepted the neatly folded clothes. They consisted of a plain gray tunic, sturdy leggings, and a lightweight jacket. She felt a tug of gratitude that they were offering her even the smallest comforts. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ingrid nodded, stepping back to allow her some privacy. "I'll wait for you out here. Then I'll show you where to go." After closing the door, Helena changed quickly, smoothing out the tunic and checking her reflection in a small mirror by the dresser. The clothes were a little loose, but they would suffice. She combed through her hair with her fingers, attempting to tame the tangles, then took a steadying breath. It was time to face the pack again. Time to walk the precarious line between earning their trust and protecting her truth. Every passing hour in their midst increased the risk that someone might spot a resemblance to her father, yet ironically, her best chance to avoid suspicion lay in plain sight. Squaring her shoulders, Helena opened the door. Ingrid offered a small smile, then led her through the corridor and out into the early morning light. The sun had just cleared the horizon, gilding the rooftops and making the dew on the grass sparkle. A group of young wolves was already busy loading a cart with supplies near the edge of the settlement, and Ingrid guided Helena to them. "Morning chores," Ingrid explained, "helping with tasks like fetching water, distributing food, and organizing equipment. It's a good way to see how the pack works together." Helena glanced around, noticing the mixture of suspicious stares and tentative nods of greeting. She could practically taste their uncertainty, but she was determined not to let it rattle her. She stepped forward and offered a stiff smile to a sandy-haired woman who appeared to be in charge. The woman handed Helena a small ledger. "We keep track of inventory here," she explained curtly. "Mark down anything you load onto the cart. If we run short of something, we have to know." Nodding, Helena accepted the ledger and a piece of charcoal. She followed the group's instructions as best she could, noting sacks of grain, bundles of firewood, containers of dried herbs. It was tedious work, but it offered a sense of normalcy that, in a strange way, felt like a relief. At least she had something tangible to focus on, rather than the swirling chaos of her inner thoughts. As she worked, she noticed Brent hovering nearby, arms folded across his chest, watching her every move. She pretended not to see him, focusing on her tasks. Others offered guarded politeness, sharing their names and roles in the pack with a mixture of caution and mild curiosity. Slowly, Helena began to grasp the rhythms of daily life here. The camaraderie in shared labor, the reliance on each other's strengths, the sense of unity that threaded them all together. "Can you bring those logs over here?" one of the younger wolves called to her. She hefted a bundle of wood, grateful for the distraction. As she carried it to the cart, she felt a twinge in her lower back. The physical toll of her nomadic existence had long since made her strong, but she was still somewhat sore from the tension of recent events. She pushed through, not wanting to give anyone reason to doubt her fitness. An hour passed, then two. To Helena's surprise, no one interrogated her further about her past. They seemed too busy to dwell on gossip. A small sense of relief blossomed in her chest, though it was tinged with a persistent undercurrent of anxiety. Every time someone looked her way, she worried they might notice the shape of her jawline or the angle of her brow, some unmistakable feature that matched her father's. But if anyone recognized it, they gave no sign. Perhaps they had never seen Malgrim up close, or maybe they believed it impossible for his child to stand among them without malevolent intent. Eventually, the sandy-haired woman announced a break, and everyone found a spot to rest and sip water from a communal barrel. Helena took a seat on a wooden crate, rolling her shoulders to ease their stiffness. Brent approached, looking torn between distrust and the faintest glimmer of grudging respect. "You work hard," he said bluntly, as if making conversation was a foreign concept. "Survival teaches you that," Helena replied, her tone measured. She took a gulp of water, feeling it cool her throat. He studied her face. "I'm not trying to make your life miserable," he said, voice lowered so only she could hear. "But I've lost too many friends to rogues. If you turn out to be working with them, I'll be the first to call for your exile or worse." A chill ran through her, but she held his gaze. "I'm not working with anyone," she said firmly, letting a trace of anger show. "I just want to exist, free from all that bloodshed." Brent stared at her for a moment longer, then nodded slightly and turned away, joining a cluster of wolves who beckoned him over. Helena released a pent-up breath, her heart hammering. She hated living under a microscope, but at least some of them were giving her a chance to prove she wasn't a danger. She was still sipping water when she sensed a change in the air, a ripple of respect and awareness that spread among the workers. Turning, she saw Xander approaching, accompanied by another wolf with thick auburn hair. The alpha offered Helena a faint nod of greeting, then addressed the sandy-haired woman leading the chores. They exchanged a few words about inventory and tasks. When he turned to Helena, his expression was neutral. "How's it going here?" he asked, projecting the calm demeanor of a leader checking in on a subordinate. "It's fine," she answered, searching his face for any sign of the tension they had shared the night before. His tone was businesslike, but she sensed an underlying concern in his eyes. He walked over to the cart, scanning the supply list. "Everything in order?" She bobbed her head. "I've recorded it all, as instructed." His lips quirked in a small smile, almost imperceptible. "Good." He turned to the group. "I'll take over from here. I need Helena to help me with another task." The workers exchanged curious glances, but no one challenged his authority. The alpha's word was final. Helena set down the ledger, wiping her hands on her tunic. Without further explanation, Xander led her away from the bustling area, toward a quiet path that meandered along the perimeter of the settlement. They walked in silence until the chatter of chores faded behind them. Once they were alone amidst the tall trees, Xander slowed his pace. "I've been watching you from a distance," he said quietly. "You're doing well." She shrugged, resisting the odd urge to show him how grateful she was for the praise. "Just trying to get by." He stopped, turning to face her fully. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead, sending patches of sunlight dancing across them. "Listen," he began, his voice solemn. "There's something I need to tell you. My beta has been looking into recent rogue activity in the region. Some scouts reported seeing a dangerous rogue with a small band of followers near the western border. I don't know if, quote, you're connected to them, but I can't ignore the possibility." Helena's stomach clenched. Could it be her father? Malgrim was known to gather discontented wolves and launch attacks on weaker packs, but she forced her expression into neutrality. "I'm not connected to any group of rogues," she said, infusing her voice with conviction she actually felt. "I don't want anything to do with that life." Xander studied her, seemingly searching her eyes for any sign of deceit. After a moment, he nodded. "I believe you, but be aware that others might not be as trusting. If tensions escalate, the pack's attitude could shift quickly." She exhaled slowly, acknowledging the tightrope she was walking. "Understood." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "And there's another concern. You and I both know there's something more happening between us. If the pack starts to suspect that connection, it could be complicated." Her heart pounded. "You mean the mate bond?" she said, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. His eyes snapped back to hers, the flicker of emotions within them confirming her words. "Yes. If they sense it, they'll demand answers. Our kind doesn't take the mate bond lightly. And once they know, they'll expect us to honor it or reject it publicly." The thought made her break into a cold sweat. Even ignoring her father's identity, the idea of publicly acknowledging a bond with an alpha was overwhelming. She had no status, no family, and had spent years despising pack life. She was entirely unprepared to stand by his side. "So what do we do?" He hesitated. "For now, nothing. I want you to keep integrating into the pack, build some level of trust. I'll handle any suspicions about our connection, but if it becomes obvious, I might have to make a statement before rumors spiral out of control." She swallowed hard. "And what kind of statement would that be?" His gaze swept over her face. "Claiming you as my mate." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She instinctively took a step back, grappling with the magnitude of those words. Claiming a mate was a serious declaration, something that bound two wolves in the eyes of the entire pack. It was an honor, yet also an immense responsibility. For an alpha, it was even more significant. He would be announcing his future Luna. And how would they all react when they realized she was a rogue, possibly tied to the tragedy that haunted them? Sensing her tumult, Xander reached out as though to touch her arm, then pulled back, uncertain of her reaction. "I'm not rushing you," he said, quietly. "I just want you to know that if it becomes necessary, I won't deny the bond. I can't. It's part of who we are." 1,000 conflicting thoughts fought for dominance in Helena's mind. The gravity of the moment swelled around her like a vast ocean, threatening to pull her under. She clenched her hands into fists, forcing herself to breathe. "I don't know what to think," she admitted, the stress cracking through her composure. "My life has been about survival, about hating packs, about everything except this. And now I'm expected to figure out a bond with an alpha I barely know?" Her chest heaved, and her voice rose with pent-up frustration. "And what if it all goes wrong? What if your pack turns against me? What if they learn something that makes them hate me? Then what?" He watched her with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "We'll handle it," he said softly. "I don't have all the answers, but I can promise I won't abandon you to face it alone." She laughed bitterly, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "You say that now, but you don't know what secrets might come out. You have no idea." His expression grew pained, but he didn't push for clarification. "You're right, I don't. But I do know that the mate bond isn't easily broken. It's woven by the moon herself, beyond our mortal power to fully control. And I know that if we ignore it, deny it out of fear, we'll still feel its pull. It won't just go away." Silence stretched between them. Helena wrapped her arms around herself, bracing against a sudden, chilling gust. She wanted to rail against the injustice of it all, to cry out that the moon had made a mistake. But deep down, she felt the bond's persistent hum, an ache and a longing that no amount of denial could entirely banish. Finally, Xander cleared his throat. "Let's head back," he said, voice subdued. "We don't want to arouse suspicion by being gone too long." She nodded mutely, following him down the winding path, her mind swirling with a tumult of thoughts and emotions. By the time they re-entered the settlement, she had managed to compose herself, slipping on a mask of neutrality. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She helped with chores, delivered supplies, and endured watchful stares. Every so often, she caught sight of Xander overseeing various aspects of pack life. Their gazes would meet, charged with unspoken tension, before they each turned away. That night, Helena found herself in the same guest quarters, the same narrow bed, staring at the same dim ceiling. But something in her had shifted irrevocably. She could not deny the growing complexity of her feelings, the sense that she was standing at a crossroads that would define her life. In one direction lay the comfort of old hatred and solitude. In the other, the promise of a bond that might bring healing or destruction. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her under. For the second night in a row, her dreams were disjointed and restless. She saw flickers of her father's scowl, her mother's gentle urging, and the alpha's somber gaze. She saw the pack's eyes burning with betrayal when they learned the truth. She felt her heart tearing in two, caught between loyalty to her past and a relentless desire for a future she could scarcely believe in. Morning came all too soon, heralded by a pale sunrise that found Helena no closer to resolving her inner chaos. She swung her feet off the bed, determined to face another day of blending in. Step by step, she told herself, building trust and hopefully uncovering a path that would allow her to slip away if all else failed. Yet the mate bond tugged at her spirit, a reminder that running might not be as simple as it once was. There was a quiet knock at her door, and she steeled herself to greet whatever the pack had in store. But when she opened it, she found Ingrid waiting with a more apprehensive expression than usual. "Good morning," the caretaker said, forcing a tight smile. "The Alpha wants you to join him in the main hall. Something's come up." Helena's pulse spiked. "What is it?" Ingrid shook her head. "I'm not entirely sure, but it seems important. Please follow me." Nerves on edge, Helena did as instructed. They wove through the settlement, passing wolves who shot worried looks her way. Something had definitely rattled the pack. They arrived at the main hall's large doors, which swung open to reveal a tense gathering. Several high-ranking wolves stood around Xander, whose expression was grim. At their feet lay a blood-stained scrap of cloth, roughly emblazoned with an ominous sigil. Helena recognized it immediately, her father's personal mark, the one he and his rogue allies used to intimidate packs. Her breath caught, and Xander's sharp gaze locked onto her. Time seemed to slow as every face in the hall turned in her direction. The silence was suffocating, and she fought to keep her composure. Blood pounded in her ears as she wondered if her secret had finally caught up to her. Xander's voice broke the hush, low and filled with tension. "We found this near our western border," he said, glancing from the cloth to Helena, "along with signs of a rogue group setting up camp. I need to know if you've seen this mark before, or if you recognize the group." Helena forced herself to move closer, as though examining the cloth. The sight of it made her stomach churn. She nodded slowly, choosing her words with caution. "I've seen it," she admitted. "There's a rogue who calls himself Malgrim. He leads small bands that rove from one territory to another, harassing packs. He used that mark to claim responsibility for attacks." She could feel the weight of every gaze on her, suspicion crackling like static in the air. Xander's voice turned dangerously soft. "You never mentioned this before." Her mind raced, trying to find an explanation that wouldn't implicate her lineage. "I've kept my distance from him," she said, truth bleeding through her fear. "He's dangerous. I've been running from him for years. I never wanted to be associated with him." Murmurs of unease rippled through the assembled wolves. One of the elders, a tall woman with iron-gray hair, spoke up. "But how do we know you're not a spy for him? That you haven't been sent here to gather information for an attack?" The logic was all too easy for them to grasp. Helena's eyes swept over the crowd, desperate to convey her innocence. "I'm not working with him," she said, voice hoarse. "Why would I put myself through all this suspicion if I was just going to betray you?" The elder pressed her lips together. Another voice rose from behind. "Maybe so we'd let down our guard." At that, Brent stepped forward, tension coiled in his posture. "Helena's had plenty of opportunities to sabotage us or leak information," he said, surprising her with his defense. "She hasn't tried anything yet." The hall filled with low, anxious chatter. Xander raised a hand for silence, scanning Helena's face. Something in his eyes suggested he sensed there was still more she wasn't saying, but he didn't press her. Instead, he faced the group. "We'll double the patrols near the western border. If Malgrim and his rogues are gathering, we won't let them strike first." Then he paused, his gaze returning to Helena. "But from now on, Helena, you won't just be supervised occasionally. I need to place you under constant watch until this threat is neutralized. For your protection and ours." Her stomach sank, understanding the implications. She would be under surveillance around the clock, with no privacy and no way to slip away. And if her father truly was amassing forces nearby, the risk that her lineage would be exposed only increased. The tension in the hall thickened to a suffocating intensity. Realizing that the eyes of the entire pack were upon her, Helena nodded stiffly. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. Xander gestured for two wolves, a stern-looking man and a wary woman, to step forward. "You'll be assigned to her for the time being. Make sure she's never alone." He spoke the words with grim resolve, and the pair accepted the duty without argument. As the group started to disperse, Helena remained rooted to the spot. She felt Xander's warm presence at her shoulder. Without looking at her, he murmured in a tone only she could hear, "I'm sorry. I have to do what's best for the pack." Her heart twisted. She believed him, and yet her hope for escape or a discreet departure now seemed impossible. With Malgrim's mark revealed, everything had changed. Even the cautious strides she had taken toward belonging were overshadowed by a looming threat that traced back to her own bloodline. She couldn't begin to guess how the pack would react if they discovered the full truth. That the very man who murdered their previous Alpha and Luna was her father, and she had never felt more tangled in a web of her own secrets. The weight of distrust settled heavily on Helena's shoulders as she found herself escorted away from the hall by the two wolves assigned to monitor her every movement. Their expressions were not openly hostile, but they offered no warmth either. She trailed behind them, conscious of how each step carried her deeper into an entanglement she could not easily escape. The crisp morning air did little to soothe her nerves, and the quiet tension that lingered in the settlement only intensified her unease. They led her to a small cabin near the center of the pack's grounds, a place Helena had noticed earlier but assumed was off-limits to outsiders. One of her escorts, a tall man with dark brown hair streaked by an old scar along his jaw, nodded toward the open door. "You'll stay in there for now," he said gruffly. "We've made arrangements for the guest quarters you were using to be repurposed. Alpha's orders." Alarm twisted in Helena's gut. She had grown used to the modest room above the communal hall. Moving her was a clear sign that her movements would be more closely controlled. "Is it locked?" she asked, keeping her tone as calm as she could manage. The other wolf, a woman with short, coppery hair, shook her head. "Not locked, but don't mistake that for leniency. One of us will be stationed outside or nearby at all times. If you make a run for it, we will catch you." Her words were stark, designed to leave no ambiguity. Helena nodded, acknowledging the terms. With the threat of Malgrim looming, the pack's paranoia would be at its peak. She could hardly blame them for wanting to keep her contained, though it stung to be treated like a prisoner. She entered the cabin, her escorts on her heels. Inside, the space was small, a single bed against one wall, a table with two chairs, and a narrow window that looked out onto a patch of grass. The decor was sparse, but at least there was a worn quilt folded at the foot of the bed. The woman set a clay pitcher of water on the table, along with a cup and a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "We'll give you time to settle in. Someone will come by soon to escort you to your assigned tasks." Without waiting for Helena to respond, they retreated, shutting the door behind them. Though it did not lock, their presence outside was more than enough to deter any attempt at flight. Helena stood in the quiet cabin, her heart pounding with the realization that she was now under constant surveillance. Even if she wanted to bolt, she would face an entire pack ready to pounce. She paced the small room, trying to calm her roiling thoughts. She needed to decide what to do about the looming threat of her father. If Malgrim was truly at the western border, he must have some plan, likely an attack, or at least a raid to steal supplies. He never led his followers without purpose, especially not this close to territory with a strong alpha. The fact that he had left his grisly mark suggested he wanted the pack to cower, or to rally the old fear they had once harbored of him. A knock startled her. She turned to see the door open slightly. Xander stood in the threshold, dismissing her escorts with a wave of his hand. He stepped inside, letting the door fall shut. In the stillness, Helena noticed the fatigue etched into his features, as though the strain of the morning's discovery had begun to wear on him. She sensed the same coiled power in him, but tonight it felt tempered by worry. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Helena gave a bitter laugh. "How do you think? I have 2 guards following my every move. The pack suspects I might be part of some master plan to betray them, and Malgrim's presence out there threatens to unearth secrets I'd rather keep buried." She pressed a hand to her temple, struggling to keep her voice level. "So I'm fine, really." He exhaled, a hint of sympathy softening his gaze. "I never wanted it to be like this. But after finding that cloth and the reports of rogue sightings, I can't risk the pack's safety." Her frustration flared. "I understand the logic, but it still feels like I'm trapped. I don't even have a chance to prove my intentions before everyone assumes the worst. Xander's eyes flicked to the window. People here have lost friends, family. Their wounds go deeper than most packs can imagine. They'll need proof of loyalty before they open their hearts. Helena felt a flicker of guilt. If they knew the full scope of her father's crimes, their suspicions would multiply tenfold. She took a shaky breath, fighting the urge to confess her lineage. She reminded herself that any admission now would be disastrous. I wish I could offer that proof, but I don't know how. I've given you what information I have about Malgrim's mark. He studied her quietly. What if you helped us find a way to stop him? She blinked. Stop him? Like drive him off? If he's already settled near your borders, that would mean a confrontation. Xander's stance grew more resolute. I plan to lead patrols. If Malgrim is threatening open conflict, I won't wait for him to strike first. My father believed in protecting this territory from any threat, and I carry that same duty. He paused. But I need insight on Malgrim's tactics. Something to help us gain an advantage. Her heart twisted at the idea of betraying her father, even if he had shown her no real kindness in years. Yet she could not deny the fact that Malgrim had caused countless deaths. She thought of the pack members she had met, of Ingrid's gentle concern, Brent's wary watchfulness, and the laughter of the young wolves playing near the orchard. Was she really going to stand by and let her father destroy the fragile community that she had, against all odds, begun to understand? She swallowed hard. He likes to strike at night, usually at the edges of a territory. Isolate a patrol. Pick off the weakest. Or he'll set fires in the farmland to draw attention away from the real target. He's cunning, always seeking the slightest chink in a pack's armor. Xander's eyes narrowed, as though he were already mentally preparing strategies to counter such attacks. And how many rogues does he usually command? It varies, Helena said, recalling her father's shifting alliances. Sometimes it's only half a dozen, other times a few more, but never an army. He prefers small, vicious raids. Xander pressed his lips together. That's helpful. It means we're not dealing with an overwhelming horde. If we coordinate our defenses properly, we can outmaneuver him. She hesitated, a quiet tremor in her voice. What will you do if you corner him? I mean, if you manage to defeat him. The question spilled out before she could stop it, revealing a flicker of concern she could not entirely hide. He gave her a puzzled look. We'll follow pack law. If he refuses to surrender, and he's responsible for murders, the penalty is severe. You must know that. Helena's stomach lurched. She nodded, unable to speak. The swirling guilt gnawed at her, knowing that she was effectively guiding the Alpha's hand against her own father, though Malgrim had never behaved like a true parent, not in the ways that mattered. She tried to cling to the reality that Malgrim's crimes were monstrous, that he had chosen his path long ago. Still, blood ties had a way of clawing at a person's conscience. Xander misread her silence as lingering fear. He stepped closer, a gentle concern in his voice. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of all this. You shouldn't have to answer for the actions of a rogue you barely know. If only you knew the truth, she thought. But the remorse that flickered in her chest made her hesitate to correct him. It struck her again how contradictory fate could be, forcing her into a bond with the son of the very Alpha and Luna her father had slaughtered. Though she had spent a lifetime hating this pack, she now saw how fiercely they protected one another. It was everything she had once envied. The realization left her with a wrenching sadness that she tried to bury. She forced herself to speak. "I'll do whatever I can to help. Justy don't expect miracles. Malgrim is wily." Xander nodded gravely. "I'll let you know when we finalize our patrol schedules. For the time being, stay alert. If you sense anything unusual, movement at the border, a suspicious scent, let me or your guards know immediately." The term "your guards" made her bristle, but she knew there was no point in arguing. She managed a curt nod, and he offered a tight smile. "Thank you, Helena. I know this isn't easy." Then he left, the door closing gently behind him. She stood there, staring at the space he had just occupied, the echo of his presence weaving into the cabin's dim quiet. She allowed herself only a brief moment to close her eyes and breathe in the lingering trace of pine that clung to the air. Then she exhaled, steadying herself. She moved to the window, peering out. The two guards were visible at a short distance, one leaning casually against a post, the other strolling back and forth. Their watchful eyes never strayed far from the cabin. Escaping them would be nearly impossible. Even more than that, part of her no longer wanted to run. She was torn between the survival instinct she had nurtured since childhood and the unfamiliar sensation that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found something worth staying for. She sank onto the bed, her thoughts a jumbled tangle. The knowledge that Malgrim hovered at the edge of the territory weighed on her, a silent threat waiting to explode. Worse, each day that passed increased the risk that someone would discover her full identity. If the pack ever realized the daughter of the murderer they despised was in their midst, it would be more catastrophic than if she simply turned and fled. Yet each time she considered fleeing, she remembered the raw sincerity in Xander's voice, the sense of belonging she had glimpsed among the pack. Could she really walk away from that possibility? The question haunted her as daylight stretched into afternoon, and afternoon slipped toward evening. Eventually, one of the guards knocked, beckoning her outside to help with chores again. Helena complied, carefully hiding her inner turmoil. She washed dishes in a communal basin behind the cookhouse, the soapy water turning her hands pruny. The entire time, the guard stood at a respectful distance, observing her every movement. Sometimes she caught glimpses of pity in his gaze, other times wariness. She longed for even a moment of true privacy. When darkness fell, Ingrid arrived with a quiet greeting, leading Helena back to her new cabin. Once inside, Helena ate a simple dinner of dried meat and bread. Then she tried to distract her busy mind by reviewing everything she knew about Malgrim's methods, hoping to identify a weakness that the pack might exploit. The hopelessness of it made her weary, and she finally drifted into fitful sleep, haunted by dreams of old memories, her father's snarling instructions, the red haze of battle, a mother's frantic whisper to stay hidden. Morning arrived with a brittle chill in the air. She pulled on the same clothes she had worn the day before, feeling rumpled but resigned. Outside, the pair of guards waited, ready to accompany her wherever the Alpha commanded. Tension rippled through the settlement, tangible in every curt nod and hushed conversation. Word had spread that a rogue clan lurked nearby, and even the children's laughter had grown subdued. A few hours later, Helena found herself called to a strategy session in the main hall, flanked by her ever-present escorts. The space was crowded with high-ranking wolves. Xander, his beta, the auburn-haired wolf named Tara, and several stern-faced elders. They stood around a large table where a parchment map was unrolled, depicting the pack's territory and its boundaries. The cloth bearing Malgrim's mark lay on a side table, a grim reminder of the threat. Tara tapped a spot on the map near the western woods. "Scouts reported rogue scents here and here," she said, pointing to two areas close to a stream that wound along the territory's edge. "They found tracks indicating maybe 8 or 9 wolves. It is unclear if there are more. Xander glanced at Helena. Based on your knowledge of Malgrim, would he hide his main camp so close to water? Helena shifted uncomfortably. Likely. He prefers locations with quick escape routes, water to mask scent, and a wooded area for cover. He rarely sets up in open ground. An elderly man cleared his throat, anxiety carved into his lined face. We should send a battalion at once. Flush him out before he has time to strengthen his position. Another elder frowned. We risk being drawn into an ambush. Malgrim is infamous for luring opponents in and striking from behind, Tara added. We might want to position smaller patrols in a perimeter. Starve him of resources. If he cannot raid our supplies or farmland, he might be forced to retreat. They all looked to Xander, whose expression was taut with concentration. We'll organize daily sweeps. Teams of 4 wolves each, rotating in shifts, leaving no sector unattended. If he attempts a sudden strike, we'll detect it quickly. Meanwhile, I want our best trackers following every clue. We pinpoint his exact camp and strike on our terms. His tone left no doubt about his resolve. Helena stood there, feeling the eyes of the council flick between her and Xander. She sensed the flicker of curiosity behind their stares, a silent question about why the Alpha seemed inclined to trust her input. A few offered tight nods, accepting her information grudgingly. Others watched her with open suspicion. Xander paused, then gestured for Helena to step closer to the table. He placed a large stone to represent Malgrim's suspected location. If you notice anything on this map that conflicts with our assumptions, speak. She swallowed nervously, scanning the territory's rough contours. Their farmland lay to the northeast, well away from the threat. The southwestern side was heavily forested, with multiple streams and rocky outcroppings. He'll likely avoid Dick Marsh areas, she murmured, pointing to a swampy patch on the far western edge. It slows movement. He hates being cornered. Tara made a note. The beta studied Helena for a moment, then turned her attention back to the others. Let's finalize the patrol assignments. They spent the next hour organizing pairs and groups, ensuring coverage of every vulnerable route. Helena listened quietly, absorbing the swift efficiency with which the pack adapted to danger. Despite her fraught circumstances, she felt a twinge of admiration for the way they rallied together. This was a far cry from the chaos of rogue life, where alliances crumbled as easily as they formed. After the final details were set, the elders departed, followed by the beta and other high-ranked wolves. Soon, only Xander remained with Helena and her 2 guards. The Alpha exhaled, leaning his hands on the edge of the table as though the weight of the world pressed down on him. I will join one of the first patrols heading west this evening, he said, voice heavy with purpose. It may only be a scouting run, but if we find Malgrim's men, we'll engage. Alarm prickled along Helena's spine. She envisioned Xander face to face with her father, the old hatred fueling a savage fight. She fought to keep her voice even. Then let me come with you. If there is a confrontation, I can help you anticipate his tactics. She paused, swallowing the knot in her throat. And I'd rather not wait here, wondering if you'll make it back. Xander looked up sharply, and she felt a subtle shift in the air. The undercurrent of concern in her words did not go unnoticed. One of the guards bristled. Alpha, that's too risky. She might slip away in the woods. Or worse, lead us into a trap. Xander's gaze flicked to Helena, then back to the guard. I appreciate your caution, but she has provided valuable insights so far. If she truly meant harm, she would not be so forthcoming. His voice was calm yet carried the firm edge of command. Besides, I'll be with her. You need not worry about her eluding the entire patrol. Helena's heart thumped. She wanted to insist on her sincerity, but fear of being too eager locked her words in her throat. Xander let the silence linger for a moment before he continued. She'll join my patrol. You too, he addressed the guards, will remain stationed here just to ensure coverage. Understood? They exchanged uneasy glances. Yes, Alpha, they said in unison, though Helena could see from their expressions that they were not pleased. The day passed in a tense blur as final preparations were made. Wolves armed themselves with sharpened blades, though many would rely on their claws and fangs in battle. The sun began its descent, bathing the horizon in a dusky orange glow. Helena's nerves coiled tighter with each passing hour. She remained near the communal dining area, picking at a small portion of food she did not truly want. Her thoughts circled endlessly around the risk of revealing her parentage if Malgrim recognized her in front of the pack. A short time before dusk, Xander found her. He wore a lightweight vest and boots well suited for quiet movement, and a dagger hung from his belt. The intensity in his eyes made her heart flutter despite the seriousness of the moment. It is time, he said simply. They gathered with 4 other wolves behind the hall. Brent, the silver-haired patrol woman Helena remembered from her first day in the forest, and 2 younger scouts. All of them eyed Helena with guarded expressions as they prepared to set out. No one spoke of trust, but the question hovered unsaid in the evening air. They slipped beyond the settlement's boundary at twilight, the forest canopy embracing them in shifting shadows. The group moved in a loose formation, Xander at the front and Brent watching the rear. Helena walked near the center, staying alert to every crackle of leaves and distant hoot of an owl. The hush of the woods was almost suffocating. Night creatures stirred in the underbrush, but otherwise the world seemed to hold its breath. An hour passed with no sign of rogues. Occasionally, one of the scouts paused to sniff the air or crouched to examine tracks. Helena's senses sharpened, searching for any hint of her father's presence. A gentle breeze carried the scent of damp earth and decaying foliage, but she could not detect the telltale odor of unfamiliar wolves. Still, tension rippled through the group, as though they expected an ambush around every tree trunk. Eventually they reached a shallow stream that meandered along rocky banks. Xander signaled for them to halt, dropping to a crouch. Helena sank beside him, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. Brent and the other wolves scanned the dark forest, their eyes glowing faintly with the wolf's night vision. The alpha turned to Helena. "Smell anything?" he whispered. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. The faint musk of wolf fur, mingled with human sweat, drifted from her companions. She picked up hints of distant deer, the fresh tang of water, and something else. A pungent odor that did not belong to the forest. It was distant, more of a trace than a definite presence, but her wolf side recognized it instinctively. She opened her eyes, nodding to Xander. Faint, but yes. They might be upstream. He nodded. Gesturing for silence, he led the patrol west, parallel to the stream. Their pace slowed, each step placed carefully to avoid snapping twigs. Despite the tension, Helena felt a reluctant pang of admiration at how smoothly they moved as a unit. She had hunted alone for so long that she had never experienced this quiet, collective synergy of a proper pack. They trudged through a small clearing strewn with boulders, the moonlight revealing them to be glistening with moss. Helena's senses kept prickling, as if something lurked just beyond the scope of her vision. Suddenly, the silver-haired woman froze, her nose lifting as she sniffed the air. She turned to Xander, nodding. They had picked up the rogue scent too. Cautiously, they fanned out among the boulders, searching for any sign of a camp. A faint glow flickered through the trees. Helena tensed, realizing it might be a fire. She gestured to Xander, who signaled the others to close in slowly. Her heart slammed in her chest. The possibility that Malgrim was truly near ignited a swirl of dread, guilt, and a strangled sense of duty. She forced her legs to move, creeping forward beside Xander. The glow brightened, revealing a small clearing where a weak fire crackled in a pit made of stones. Shapes moved around it, wolves in human form, draped in ragged clothes, their postures tense. Helena counted 5. Their subdued conversation carried on the breeze, though she could not make out the words. From the corner of her eye, she saw Xander flex his fingers, preparing for a potential fight. But Malgrim was nowhere in sight. Helena felt a disorienting tangle of relief and anxiety. If her father was not here, it did not mean he was absent from the territory. Perhaps he was waiting elsewhere, or had left these rogues as a vanguard. Nonetheless, Xander's patrol had come across a real threat. If they struck now, they might subdue these wolves, or at least force them to reveal more about Malgrim's whereabouts. One of the rogues lifted his head suddenly, sniffing. His eyes widened, and he barked a warning that rang through the silent forest. The group sprang to their feet, brandishing makeshift weapons or letting claws slide free in partial shifts. Xander stood, stepping out from behind cover with a calm but commanding presence. "You are trespassing on my land," he said, voice low. "Surrender, and we will show mercy." A rogue with greasy black hair spat on the ground. "We answer to no alpha," he snarled. "Especially not a whelp who cowers behind borders." Helena heard the rumbling growl rise in Xander's throat. She felt the air sizzle with the tension of an inevitable clash. The silver-haired wolf advanced from the side, while Brent moved behind the group of rogues to cut off their escape. Helena lingered at Xander's flank, uncertain whether to shift. Her pulse hammered. If the fighting began, would she be able to stand against these rogues and possibly kill them, knowing they were allied with her father? The rogue with black hair smirked suddenly, lifting a hand. "Wait," he hissed to his companions. He glared at Xander, then let his gaze dart to Helena. A flicker of surprise flashed across his face. I've seen you before. You're Malgrim's cub." His voice echoed across the clearing, each syllable a death knell to her carefully guarded secret. Her blood ran cold. For a moment, she could not speak, her mouth going dry as she registered the stunned silence from Xander's patrol. She felt Brent's gaze burning into her back, the silver-haired woman's sharp intake of breath. The rogue let out a harsh laugh, pointing an accusatory finger at Helena. "It's her, all right." Malgrim used to brag about how he taught his daughter to hunt. All eyes turned to Helena. The horrifying truth laid bare in the rogue's mocking accusation. She saw shocked chisel lines into Xander's face, followed swiftly by betrayal and confusion. A trembling panic seized her, and in that moment of hesitation, the rogues took advantage of the patrol's stunned reaction. They lunged, teeth bared and weapons raised. Violence exploded in a storm of snarls and flashing claws. Xander roared, meeting 2 rogues head-on, his powerful strikes fueled by righteous fury. Brent grappled with a third, while the silver-haired wolf slammed into another. The younger scouts charged forward to assist, but Helena stood rooted, her mind splintered by the shattering of her secret. One of the rogues lunged at her, blade raised. Instinct drove her to dodge. She shifted partially, letting claws sprout from her fingertips, and slashed back. The metal clattered to the ground as she disarmed him. She could feel tears threatening as everything she had feared came crashing down. The truth was out. She could never hide who she was again. Her adversary lunged again, but she ducked and raked her claws across his arm, forcing him to stagger back with a cry of pain. Meanwhile, Xander and Brent had subdued two of the rogues, pinning them to the dirt. The silver-haired woman struggled with another, but with assistance from one of the scouts, they forced him down. Helena's opponent, outnumbered and outmatched, bared his teeth in a snarl before turning on his heel to flee into the night. Brent started to chase him, but Xander barked, "No, let him go. We need answers from the ones we've caught." Brent hesitated, then returned to stand guard over the prisoners. The terrified, furious rogues spat curses that they were bound by ropes the patrol carried for just such an occasion. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sounds were the rogues' gasping breaths and the crackle of the small fire. Then Xander turned to Helena, his expression twisting with raw anger and hurt. The silver-haired wolf and Brent exchanged stunned glances, the younger scouts looking on in confusion. Helena felt as though she might shatter under the weight of all their eyes. "Is it true?" Xander's voice was tight. "You are Malgrim's daughter." She could barely speak, her throat constricted. She forced out a choked whisper. "Yes." His hands clenched at his sides. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though grappling with a wave of emotion. When he opened them again, betrayal smoldered there. "You knew all along," he said, a bitter edge coating each syllable. "You knew that your father was responsible for the worst tragedy our pack has endured." She nodded numbly, words failing her. Her worst fears had manifested. She felt the tear in the mate bond between them, a fracture she was sure would never mend. Some of the other wolves stared at her with open hostility, and she sensed that everything was about to unravel. "How could you?" Brent growled, taking a step toward her, fists clenching. "After all we did to give you a chance, you lied to us. Lied to the Alpha." Helena shrank back. "I never wanted this," she managed, voice trembling. "I never asked to be his daughter. I came here by accident, and by the time I realized who you all were, it was too late to say anything. I was afraid." Anguish mingled with Xander's anger. "So, every time we asked for the truth, every time I felt that connection," he broke off, turning away. She saw his shoulders trembling, and the pain in his posture was almost more than she could bear. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me. Did you think I would welcome you if I knew? Or did you assume I would kill you on sight?" She could not answer. She could scarcely breathe. Her entire world had collapsed, and all she felt was an aching swirl of guilt, shame, and despair. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry," she whispered. Silence stretched. The silver-haired wolf shifted angrily, but refrained from speaking. Two of the captured rogues continued cursing, though their words became garbled under the fury that crackled in the clearing. Xander dragged in a ragged breath. "We will deal with this, but not here." He beckoned to the others. "Tie her as well." Helena's breath caught in her throat as Brent advanced, rope in hand. She did not resist. Shame scorched her insides. Even if she tried to run, she could never outrun the bitterness of what she had done, concealing her father's identity from them. A father who had murdered Xander's parents. She shut her eyes as the coarse rope bit into her wrists. The patrol's return to the pack settlement was slow and subdued. Helena walked with her head bowed, rope binding her hands. The two rogues captured alive spat insults at her, calling her traitor, though she hardly cared. Her mind churned with dread over the likely outcome of this revelation. Would Xander kill her? Or would the pack tear her apart in fury? Upon reaching the main hall, the guards inside erupted in confusion and alarm at the sight of their alpha returning with Helena bound. A clamor rose as the assembled pack demanded answers. Brent dragged the captured rogues forward. At the same time, Xander's gaze swept over the onlookers, and Helena saw him struggling to maintain composure. Grief bled into his expression as he pointed at her. "She is Malgrim's daughter," he said evenly, though his voice held an undercurrent of emotional strain. She hid the truth. A storm of outrage rippled through the crowd. Wolves snarled curses and accusations. Ingrid, who stood near the edge of the throng, pressed a hand to her mouth in shock. Others glared daggers at Helena, as though ready to tear her limb from limb. She felt the hostility crashing down on her like a tidal wave. One of the elders pushed forward, face contorted with rage. "You dare to bring her among us? After what her father did to our last Alpha and Luna?" A chorus of snarls and heated words erupted. Helena's knees wobbled, terror gripping her like a vice. She wanted to defend herself, to plead for mercy, but the crowd's fury threatened to drown her out. At last, Xander lifted his hand, and his power as Alpha commanded silence. The hush that followed was thick with menace. "I will question the rogues we captured," he announced in a tight voice. "We will determine Malgrim's intentions. As for her," he shot Helena a piercing look, "she will remain bound until I decide what is to be done. I will not act rashly. That is not my way. But the pack demands justice," someone shouted. Others chimed in. "She deceived us. She's part of Malgrim's bloodline he sent her. This was all a trap." Helena watched Xander's jaw tighten. She sensed the depth of conflict raging within him. "I understand your anger," he said at last. "But we are not rogues who tear each other apart without thought. We will hear her words. Then I will make a final decision." The tension in the hall did not ease, but the crowd obeyed its Alpha's command. Xander gestured for Brent to bring Helena to a side room typically used for private discussions. A few others followed, likely to ensure she did not escape. She moved numbly, hardly aware of her surroundings, her bound hands trembling. She caught sight of Ingrid's anguished expression in the crowd, but it only deepened her sense of shame. Everywhere she looked, eyes filled with betrayal and loathing. In the side chamber, Brent stationed himself by the door, arms folded. The silver-haired wolf and another guard hovered nearby. Xander stood across from Helena, silent for a long moment. She wanted to speak, but found no words that could possibly absolve her. Finally he spoke, low and steady, though his voice quivered with barely suppressed emotion. "Why did you come here, if you knew who we were?" "I didn't know at first," she said, voice shaking. "My mother died. I was desperate for food and wandered too close. Then you found me, and after I realized I tried to leave, but I was caught. You treated me kindly despite knowing I was rogue. I feared what would happen if I told you my father was him. You feared it enough to hide the truth for days?" His eyes flashed with anger, but she also heard the hurt beneath it. "You should have told me from the start." Hot tears pricked her eyes. "And what would you have done if I had? You all hate my father." "Rightfully so. You wouldn't have believed that I'm not like him. He never showed me loyalty. He left me and my mother to fend for ourselves. I've spent my whole life in the shadows of his crime. I've never dared set foot near a pack because I knew the hatred they held for him, and for anyone sharing his blood." Xander glanced aside, as if searching for clarity in the wood grain of the floor. "If you had told me the truth, I might have listened," he said softly. Then his anger surged once more, and he clenched his fists. "Instead, you stood by my side, looked me in the eye, and let me think we were aligned. You let me feel that bond forming without revealing the darkest secret of all. Her chest ached. She recalled his willingness to accept her, his readiness to let her into the pack despite her rogue status. And she had deceived him by omission, letting him believe she was no more than a drifting outcast. "I'm sorry," she choked out, knowing the words were painfully insufficient. "I swear, I never meant harm. I only wanted to survive." He studied her for what felt like an eternity, emotions warring on his face. The guards said nothing, though their stern expressions indicated where their loyalties lay. Finally Xander spoke, each word clipped. "I will hold you under guard. We will see if you had any part in Malgrim's plan to attack us. If there is evidence you aided him, I will not hesitate to punish you. If I find no such proof, I will decide how best to handle your presence here." A flicker of hope leapt in her chest, though it felt painfully fragile. "Thank you," she whispered, voice raw. "Thank you for giving me a chance." He gave a bitter laugh that carried no real humor. "Do not thank me yet. The pack wants your blood. Their rage cannot be placated easily." He paused, lowering his gaze. "We also have the bond to consider. I do not fully grasp how the moon could weave our fates like this. Maybe it is a cruel trick, or maybe it is a test. All I know is, I cannot look at you without thinking of my parents, and that is a wound I never thought would be torn open again." Her tears finally spilled over. She wished she could reach out to him, but her hands remained bound. Despair lanced through her as she realized that despite the extraordinary connection drawing them together, her father's sin overshadowed everything. No cosmic bond could erase a blood debt of this magnitude. Xander pulled away, fighting to control himself. "Take her to the holding cell. We will question the rogues. Then tomorrow I will address the pack and decide her fate." Brent nodded grimly, grabbing Helena's arm. She offered no resistance, her spirit crushed. The silver-haired wolf unlatched a hidden door off the main corridor, leading to a narrow stairwell that descended underground. Helena's heart hammered. She had never been in a formal pack's holding cells, but she had heard stories of their iron bars and thick walls meant to contain the strongest werewolves. Down in the cellar, torchlight flickered against stone walls. The place smelled of damp earth and old metal. The corridor ended in a series of barred cells, each with a heavy door that locked from the outside. Brent shoved one open. Inside, there was a simple wooden bench and a small pile of straw in the corner. She stepped in, and the door clanged shut behind her, the lock snapping into place. They left her there, alone with her grief and regret. She sank onto the bench, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. The entire pack now knew who she was. The alpha she had begun to care for, and who had begun to care for her, felt betrayed. Malgrim was lurking in the darkness, preparing to strike, and she, the daughter of a murderer, was alone in a cold cell, awaiting judgment that might very well end her life. Helena wrapped her arms around herself and pressed her forehead against the rough stone wall, longing for some shred of comfort. None came. She could only wait in the silence, wrestling with the realization that no matter how she tried to escape her father's legacy, it had caught her in the end. And even a mate bond as powerful as the moon's call might not be enough to break the chains of her past. Morning came in a dim haze, the only sign of daybreak the faint glow that filtered through a barred ventilation shaft set high in the cell. Helena's body ached from a restless night spent on the hard bench. She sat hunched, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes stinging from lack of proper sleep. Each passing hour felt like a cold weight pressing on her soul. She heard no sounds beyond the occasional drip of water and the distant shuffle of footsteps overhead. The pack's world continued as normal, while she remained buried underground, a living symbol of the tragedy that had scarred them. At some point, someone slid a wooden bowl of porridge through a small hatch in the door, but she barely touched it, her appetite lost in the pit of her dread. Eventually, heavy footsteps descended the stairwell. The silver-haired patrolwoman unlocked the door, accompanied by Brent. Both wore grim expressions. Brent's stance was especially rigid, as though he braced for something unpleasant. "Come on," he said curtly. "The Alpha wants you in the main hall." Helena's stomach twisted into knots. She stood, her limbs shaky, and followed them. They bound her wrists again, though the silver-haired wolf kept a firm grip on the rope as they led her through the corridor. The morning light in the upper hall stung her eyes, a harsh contrast to the darkness of the cell. A surge of tension clung to every inch of the air. Wolves gathered in clusters, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent as Helena passed. Their gazes burned with collective outrage or confusion. She glimpsed Ingrid standing by a doorway, wringing her hands in sorrow. Ingrid's eyes met Helena's for an instant, filled with a muted anguish. Then Helena was ushered onward, toward the heart of the main hall. Inside, a large group of pack members waited. The elders stood near the front, eyes glinting with unresolved grief and anger. Tara stood beside them, her normally calm features etched with grim focus. Xander took center stage, arms folded tightly over his chest. Helena's breath caught at the sight of him. The bruised shadow under his eyes hinted at a sleepless night. His expression, however, was composed, hardened for what he had to do. The moment Helena entered, a rustle of movement passed through the crowd. Accusations trembled on people's lips. She could almost feel their howls of condemnation, held in check only by the Alpha's authority. Brent and the silver-haired woman directed her to stand a short distance from Xander, where everyone could see her. The rope binding her hands felt more oppressive than ever. Xander cleared his throat. "The rogues we captured last night have been interrogated," he began, voice resonating in the cavernous hall. "They confirm that Malgrim is indeed planning an attack on our territory. He awaits the right moment to strike. His intention is to sow chaos and fear, just as he has done before." His gaze shifted to Helena, who fought the urge to flinch. "He also boasted of his daughter infiltrating our ranks, though we gleaned little else of value from them." Low growls spread among the onlookers, and Helena cringed inwardly, imagining their fury. Xander raised a hand to regain order. "These rogues insisted that Helena was part of the plan, but in questioning them, it became clear they had not seen her for some time. They were surprised to find her here. That casts doubt on whether she has been working with Cray." "Malgrim." A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembly. Some wolves tilted their heads, considering the Alpha's words. Others shook their heads, unconvinced. One of the elders, his hair a mix of gray and silver, spoke up, voice trembling with pent-up wrath. "Even if she was not actively helping him, she is still the child of our greatest enemy. How can we allow her to remain among us?" Many nodded in agreement, the question echoing through the crowd. Helena clenched her hands, the rope biting into her skin. She felt the need to speak, to defend herself. But every time she opened her mouth, shame and uncertainty froze her voice. Xander turned to face her fully, and she saw the heartbreak hidden behind his outward composure. "I will not deny the pain and anger this revelation has caused," he said, addressing both her and the pack. "For years, we have lived with the memory of how the previous Alpha and Luna, my parents, were stolen from us by Malgrim's hand. It is natural to view their child as an extension of that evil." A wave of bitterness shuddered through the onlookers. Some cast their gazes away, tears gathering in their eyes at the memory of that infamous night. Xander waited for the tension to settle before continuing. But we are not a community that punishes children for their parents' crimes, nor are we a pack that abandons our sense of reason the moment old wounds are reopened. The elder with iron-gray hair snapped. Surely you do not intend to let her walk free after she lied to all of us? Mutters of agreement rose around the hall. Helena's heart sank deeper. Her eyes burned, and she wished desperately she could at least free her hands enough to wipe away the sting of tears. She will not walk free unconditionally, Xander answered, tone steeled with authority. She deceived us about her heritage, though I understand her reasons, and I will not dismiss that betrayal lightly. She will remain under watch until Malgrim's threat is ended, and she has proven beyond any doubt that she stands apart from him. Tara, who had been silent, stepped forward. And, if she proves untrustworthy, her voice was careful but direct, then she faces exile, Xander replied, his eyes never leaving Helena. The single word rang like a final sentence in the tense air. If she dares betray the pack, or if we discover she has been aiding Malgrim, she will be cast out. Or worse. A hiss of approval and caution traveled through the assembled wolves. Helena's legs felt weak, but some tiny flicker of relief stirred in her chest that he had not called for her immediate execution. It was small consolation, but it was better than she had hoped. The elder with the silver hair glowered. And how do we know she is not a ticking bomb in our midst, waiting for the right moment to open our gates to Malgrim? Xander's features hardened. Because she will be under my eye. And if I am wrong to trust her, that failure will be on me. He exhaled, the bitterness of the choice etched in his expression. I alone will bear the weight of that decision. The hush that followed was excruciating. Then, haltingly, Ingrid stepped forward, clasping her hands anxiously. Alpha, she never showed signs of malice toward us. I believe that some are shaped by more than their bloodline. Perhaps we should give her a fair chance. A few voices in the crowd hissed, naive and foolish, but Ingrid's words carried a gentle sincerity that seemed to resonate with at least some who listened. Helena cast the caretaker a grateful, tearful look, though Ingrid avoided direct eye contact, as if embarrassed by her outspokenness. Xander waited, scanning the gathered wolves. He must have sensed that the pack was on the verge of fracturing over this. We are at a crossroads, he said, voice echoing. Malgrim's presence demands we stand united. Harboring Malgrim's daughter under our roof, however, risks disunity if we cannot contain our fear and anger. I will not pretend this is simple, but I cannot hand down a death sentence based on lineage alone. We are better than that. The large crowd stirred, tension still running high, but no one openly challenged the Alpha's decree. Some turned away, grim-faced. Others looked unconvinced, but unwilling to undermine the pack's leadership. A flicker of hope found its way into Helena's chest, though overshadowed by the knowledge that she was far from acceptance. Finally, Xander nodded to Brent. Release her from the ropes, then take her outside. Let her get some air. He paused, his tone ironclad. But remain at her side. She is not free to roam unguarded. Brent seemed reluctant, but he complied. Approaching Helena, he untied the rope digging into her wrists. She rubbed her tender skin, eyes cast downward. Then Brent gripped her elbow and steered her through the hall's main exit. On their way out, Helena saw Xander's gaze follow her, filled with unresolved pain and conflicted longing, a mirror of the tumult roiling within her own heart. Outside, the sunlight was jarring after the claustrophobic walls of the cell and the tense interior of the hall. The pack's daily life continued, but everything seemed overshadowed by the revelation of her identity. Whispers and stares hounded her every step. A few wolves openly bared their teeth or spat in her direction, though no one attacked outright. Brent guided her to a spot near the settlement's perimeter, where a few large stones formed a natural bench beside an ancient pine. "You can sit," he said curtly, folding his arms. "I'm not letting you out of my sight, so don't get any ideas about running." She sank onto one of the stones, hugging her arms around herself. The cold heaviness in her chest weighed on her like an anchor. She stared at the horizon, where rolling hills stretched into thick forests. Somewhere out there, Malgrim was plotting an assault. She wondered what he would do if he found her among the pack. Would he try to reclaim her, or see her as a traitor? The memory of the rogue who recognized her still echoed, his harsh laughter conjuring images of all the secrets she had wanted to hide. Brent stood in stiff silence, occasionally sparing her a sidelong glance. She suspected he battled a swirl of conflicting emotions himself. Finally, he spoke in a low mutter. "I lost my best friend to your father's wrath. She was barely 18, out on patrol. When his rogues ambushed her team, they tortured them, left them for dead. I found her body. So do not expect me to believe you are blameless just yet." Her eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Your friend's death and my father's cruelty, I can never erase that. I can only say that I had no part in it." He clenched his jaw. "I want to believe that. But you lied to us already." "I know," she murmured, the weight of her past mistakes crushing. "I was cowardly. It's what I've been taught, to keep my head down, to hide. I never believed I could have a place here or anywhere." He eyed her, the anger in his gaze tempered by fatigue. "Right now, your words do little. Actions might speak louder, but you may not get the chance. The pack is divided. If Malgrim attacks, there will be casualties, and with every drop of blood spilled, the hatred for your lineage will grow." She nodded, dread blooming inside her. "I'm aware." They fell into silence again. Helena forced herself to look around, absorbing the daily life still unfolding. Wolves worked at a wooden structure nearby, hammering boards into place, probably reinforcing defenses. A few pups peeked around a corner, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Everything felt on the brink of explosion, with the pack's normal routines carried out under the shadow of impending battle. Time crawled by. After a while, Ingrid appeared, carrying a bowl of stew. She approached hesitantly, glancing at Brent. "She should eat," the caretaker said, voice subdued. Brent gave a curt nod. Ingrid knelt, setting the bowl on a flat stone within Helena's reach. Helena whispered a quiet thanks, her eyes filling with gratitude for the small kindness. Ingrid offered a wavering smile that quickly retreated, as if fearful that her empathy might be frowned upon. Helena sipped the stew, the savory warmth spreading through her chest. Her thoughts drifted to Xander, to how he must be feeling after the devastation of learning she was Malgrim's daughter. She saw again the flicker of pain in his eyes, recalled the way he had gently offered her acceptance before the truth came out. Now, everything was steeped in betrayal. The bond between them felt frayed, but an ember of connection still glowed faintly in her core, refusing to be extinguished. By afternoon, a messenger hurried by, summoning Brent with an urgent message. He glared at Helena. "Stay here. Do not move. You try anything, I will know." Then he strode off, leaving her momentarily unsupervised except for a few watchful eyes at a distance. For a fleeting second, Helena considered running. But where would she go? She could never outrun an entire pack, and her father lurked beyond the borders. There was nowhere safe, no refuge from the conflagration her life had become. Instead, she stayed seated, guilt and exhaustion rooting her in place. After perhaps 15 minutes, Brent returned, his face set with grim lines. "Xander wants to see you," he said tersely, helping her stand and guiding her toward the communal hall. The bustle in the settlement had intensified. Wolves hurrying back and forth with weapons, supplies, and guarded expressions. Helena sensed that something new had happened. Inside the hall, she found Xander, Tara, and a few elders gathered around a table. A young scout stood among them, visibly anxious. As Helena and Brent approached, Xander beckoned them closer. His voice was taut. "We've received word that Malgrim's band is on the move. Scouts say they spotted them in the western forest, close to the farmland." Tara tapped a marked area on the map. "If they burn our crops, we'll face a shortage of food, not to mention the danger to anyone working the fields." An elder added, "We must move quickly. If we can intercept them before they set fire to the fields, we have a chance to repel them." Xander's gaze shifted to Helena, a maelstrom of emotions flickering there: anger, pain, and something resembling reluctant trust. "You said he favors stealth and quick strikes. Do you think this is a feint?" Helena inhaled shakily. "Possibly. He might use a small group to draw the pack's defenders to one area, then strike somewhere else. Or he might go all in on a decisive blow. Either way, he wants to wound you, to show he can cripple the pack's conqueror. Resources." The beta nodded. "We should split our forces, half to guard the farmland, half to patrol the perimeter." Xander considered this, jaw clenched. "Agreed. But we cannot stretch ourselves too thin." He looked Helena's way again. "If you have any insight on how Malgrim would approach farmland attacks, share it now." She swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "He might send a few wolves to start small fires. If the farmland workers call for help, or if the pack musters there, he will be waiting to ambush from the tree line. Expect archers. He uses bows to pick off defenders from a distance while others set the fields ablaze." A hush fell. The scout from earlier trembled. "We must hurry," they said softly. "If the farmland is lost, we face starvation this winter." Xander nodded curtly. "We move out immediately. Tara, gather a team. Protect the farmland. I will lead another team to circle around and block any ambush in the woods." His eyes flicked to Helena. "Brent, keep her with you. If she tries to run or sabotage us, you know what to do." Brent inclined his head, while Helena's heart pounded at Xander's cold directive. It cut her to the core. Still, she managed a nod. "I understand," she whispered, her throat tight. Within minutes, the pack mobilized. Wolves shifted, forming teams that sprinted away to their assigned defenses. Helena found herself in a group of 6, including Xander and Brent. They moved swiftly through the settlement and into the western forests, guided by the scouts' descriptions of where Malgrim's forces had been seen. Twilight stretched long shadows over the land by the time they neared the farmland. Smoke curled upward in thin tendrils from the direction of the fields. Helena's stomach lurched. Malgrim's group had likely begun their assault. She could already hear faint shouts, the clash of wolves engaging in frenzied combat somewhere ahead. A primal fear clawed at her chest. Somewhere in the chaos, her father might be present, thirsting for blood and triumph. Xander signaled for them to slow, scanning the trees with narrowed eyes. The thick canopy crackled with tension. Suddenly, a shrill cry cut through the air, followed by the roar of flames. Helena caught a glimpse of bright, dancing light beyond the next ridge. Her instincts screamed. A fire had started. Possibly more than one. The group pressed forward, branching out in pairs. Helena and Brent stuck to Xander's side, the alpha forging ahead with purposeful strides. Smoke stung Helena's eyes as they emerged at the edge of the farmland. She saw burning patches among rows of tall stalks. Pack wolves rushed to douse the flames, beating at them with wet blankets or shoveling earth over embers. Some farmers tried to herd livestock away from danger. It was chaos, the thick odor of smoke mingling with panicked shouts. Then, from the tree line, rogue archers fired a volley of arrows. Wolves ducked, seeking cover behind barrels or wagons. One arrow found its mark, striking a young wolf in the shoulder, eliciting a sharp yelp of pain. Helena's heart twisted. She glanced at Brent, but his attention was fixed on scanning for the Archer's position. Xander snarled. "Brent, circle around. Try to flush them into the open. Helena." He stopped, face contorting as though he had nearly forgotten her presence. "Stay behind me, or you will get yourself killed." She nodded, following close as he sprinted across an open stretch of ground, weaving between smoldering rows. Adrenaline surged through her, pounding in her ears. Amid the swirling smoke, she spotted figures moving in the shadows at the field's perimeter. One turned, bow drawn, arrow aimed directly at Xander. In a burst of frantic instinct, Helena lunged forward, slamming into Xander's side. The arrow whizzed by, missing him by mere inches. Her momentum sent them both tumbling to the ground. Pain jarred her shoulder on impact, and she gasped, but relief flooded her. She had averted a fatal shot. Xander scrambled up, eyes wide. "You! Watch out!" she cried, rolling aside just as another arrow thumped into the dirt. In response, Xander growled and shifted partially, letting claws elongate as he darted toward the archer's position. Helena scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sting of bruises. She kept pace, supporting Xander by hurling small rocks or debris at the hidden rogues, trying to disrupt their aim. A savage clash erupted at the edge of the field. Several of Xander's wolves engaged Malgrim's archers in close combat, shifting to wolf form to tear at them with snapping jaws. Helena glimpsed the silver-haired patrolwoman leaping into the fray, her wolf shape a blur of fangs and fury. The rogues fought viciously, but the pack's coordinated strikes began to push them back. Then Helena caught sight of a tall, menacing figure stalking through the smoke. He moved with a brutal grace, each step exuding confidence. His hair hung in matted strands around a scarred face, eyes alight with a gleeful malice. He carried an axe in one hand, blood staining the blade's edge. Helena's heart clenched in recognition. Malgrim. The father who had shaped her nightmares. The father who had murdered an Alpha and Luna. Xander locked eyes with the rogue leader across a short distance, the two men separated by drifting clouds of smoke and swirling ash. Each recognized the other at once. The son of slaughtered parents confronting the murderer who had torn his family apart. The tension was electric, as if the world around them vanished for an instant, focusing only on this lethal encounter. Malgrim flashed a grin, lifting the axe in a mocking salute. "So you're the new Alpha," he sneered. "I've been waiting a long time for this." His voice was rough, as though ground by years of violence. Xander bared his teeth, claws flexing. "I will end what you started," he said, voice tight with rage. "This territory will never belong to you." Before either could lunge, Helena stepped forward on trembling legs, drawn by an involuntary compulsion to intervene. The swirling madness felt surreal, the bond between her and Xander pulling her like a magnet, while blood ties to Malgrim made her skin crawl. She did not want to watch them tear each other apart, yet the inevitability of the confrontation was undeniable. Malgrim spotted her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Then his grin widened cruelly. "My daughter," he called, tone oozing false warmth. "I heard rumors you ran off to befriend the ones I despise. Now I see it with my own eyes. Do you stand with them, child?" Helena's lips parted, no words coming. Her mind roiled with 1,000 emotions. Resentment for how he abandoned her, hatred for what he had done, shame at the bond of blood that still linked them. The chaos around them seemed to recede, if only for a heartbeat, leaving her alone in this moment of choice. Then Malgrim laughed, shaking his head. "No matter. If you plan to defend this pack of weaklings, you are my enemy as much as their alpha is." He lunged at Xander with a snarl, axe raised high. Xander met him head-on, their weapons and claws flashing in a flurry of movement. Sparks flew as metal struck metal, and the impact rattled through the air like a thunderclap. Malgrim's strength was immense, fueled by an unhinged fury, but Xander's skill and determination matched it, honed by years of training and a thirst for justice. Time seemed to slow for Helena as she watched the savage dance of blades and claws. Each strike threatened to be fatal. She saw an opening, realized Malgrim had left a gap in his guard, but Xander had not noticed. Heart lurching, she dashed forward, ignoring Brent's yell to stay back. She grabbed a broken spear from the ground, adrenaline numbing her mind to anything except the desperate need to help. Malgrim swung the axe in a lethal arc, and Xander ducked, but his momentum carried him too far to retaliate effectively. Helena's limbs trembled as she thrust the broken spear at Malgrim's exposed side, aiming to disrupt his attack. He roared in pain, twisting around to glare at her. Rage filled his eyes. She had just wounded him in the midst of his duel. He bellowed, yanking the spear from his side, blood spotting the ground. "You dare strike your own father?" He spat, raising the axe for a blow that would surely kill her. Fear paralyzed her, but she refused to back down. She was done being silent, done letting his tyranny shape her fate. But before Malgrim could swing, Xander seized the advantage. The alpha's claws raked across Malgrim's forearm, forcing him to drop the axe. With a savage snarl, Xander tackled him, both crashing to the ground. Dirt and ash flew as they wrestled, each trying to overpower the other. Helena stumbled back, gasping for breath. All around them, wolves battled the remaining rogues, but the decisive confrontation centered on Xander and Malgrim. The older rogue was cunning, using dirty tricks, trying to choke Xander or gouge at his eyes. Yet each time, Xander countered, fueled by unwavering resolve. The air crackled with an almost tangible current. Both men strove to end a blood feud decades in the making. A sudden shift in weight allowed Xander to slam Malgrim onto his back. Snarling, the alpha pressed his claws to the rogue's throat, teeth bared. Malgrim struggled, cursing, but Xander pinned him with the strength of righteous fury. Panting, Xander locked eyes with the man who murdered his parents. Malgrim glared up at him, breath rasping through clenched teeth. "I should kill you," Xander hissed. His voice was raw, flecked with bitterness. "You deserve nothing less for what you did. Every soul you've tortured, every life you've stolen." Malgrim coughed, a ghastly grin twisting his features. "Then do it, boy. Finish the deed. Show your pack that you have their precious vengeance." Helena saw Xander's claws tense, pressing into Malgrim's neck. Blood welled, and she thought he would tear Malgrim's throat out then and there. All her bitterness toward her father roared to life, clamoring for justice. Yet a small, desperate part of her remembered that Malgrim was still her father by blood. She hated him, yet the finality of watching him slaughtered before her eyes struck fear into her heart. She stepped closer, voice trembling. "Xander, wait." He turned his head sharply, eyes blazing. She flinched, but forced herself to continue. "If you kill him now, you give him what he wants. Another cycle of blood and hatred. He deserves punishment. But don't become like him. You are not a murderer. You are an alpha who protects his pack, not one who revels in slaughter." Malgrim let out a hollow laugh. "Spoken like a coward. You cannot escape what I am. Your blood is my blood." Helena's voice rose, the anguish of her lifetime of conflict boiling over. "I am nothing like you. My choices define me, not my blood. And I choose to help the pack you have harmed." A flicker of emotion passed through Xander's gaze. Pain, rage, indecision. He exhaled sharply, and his claws eased away from Malgrim's throat, though he still pinned him. "You don't deserve the mercy she asks for," he snarled at the rogue leader. "But I won't stoop to your level." Summoning the last vestiges of restraint, he shifted back to human form enough to wrap his arm around Malgrim's neck in a secure hold, subduing him. "You will stand trial under our laws." Pack members converged, some bloodied, all exhausted. They bound Malgrim in chains specially crafted to contain werewolf strength. The last of the rogue fighters lay defeated or captured, a few having fled into the darkness. Smoke continued to drift across the farmland, but the fires were subdued, and the majority of the fields, while damaged, remained intact. The farmland was not lost. Helena slumped, adrenaline fading and replaced by a trembling exhaustion. She glanced at Xander, who knelt in the scorched earth, blood smeared across his arms. His eyes flicked to hers, a hurricane of emotion swirling there. Then he turned away, issuing orders for the remaining rogues to be bound, and marched back to the settlement. Victory had a hollow taste. Darkness had fully fallen by the time the pack gathered up the injured and the prisoners. Wolves carried torches, lighting the path back. Malgrim snarled curses and threats, though his words were met with stony silence. Helena walked a short distance behind Xander, a swirl of conflicting feelings threatening to choke her. She had helped save the farmland, and she had helped stop her father. But the cost was a canyon of betrayal between her and the Alpha. By the time they re-entered the settlement, many wolves had emerged from their homes, anxiously awaiting news. A subdued cheer rose at the sight of Malgrim bound, though their excitement was tempered by the sight of their wounded packmates. Wolves hurried to assist the injured. The captured rogues, including Malgrim, were marched to secure cells, guarded by multiple sentries. Helena lingered on the outskirts, uncertain of her place. She noticed Brent near the communal hall, supporting a wolf with a bandaged arm. Their eyes met briefly, and though Brent's expression was guarded, he offered a small nod. Perhaps he recognized that her actions had aided their cause tonight, that she had not betrayed them. Xander moved through the throng, checking on the wounded. Eventually his gaze settled on Helena. She braced herself, expecting rejection or condemnation. Instead, he beckoned her over with a weary gesture. Reluctantly, she approached, footsteps dragging. The crowd parted, allowing her through, though some glared. Ingrid and a few others stood nearby, quietly tending those who had burns or arrow wounds. Standing across from her, Xander's face was streaked with soot, hair hanging in damp tangles. Even so, his alpha presence radiated outward. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said in a low voice, "You saved my life tonight. Twice. I will not forget that." Her eyes burned. "I could not watch you die. You, this pack, deserve the chance to thrive, and I'm sorry about the lies." He studied her, as though searching for any lingering deception. "Perhaps your choices tonight have proven some measure of where you truly stand, but I cannot ignore the pain you caused by hiding your lineage." He paused, a hint of softness creeping into his gaze despite the barriers between them. "I do not know how to reconcile the bond we share with the memory of my parents' murders." A shaky breath escaped Helena. "I do not know either," she admitted. "But I want to try, if you will let me." He glanced around at the bruised, bloodied wolves tending to each other. Many were watching them with open curiosity. "It will not be easy," he said quietly. "The pack still sees you as Malgrim's daughter, and I cannot blame them. We will need time to heal. But for now, you have done more than enough to earn a reprieve from suspicion." He hesitated, taking one slow step closer, voice just loud enough for her to hear. "The mate bond still resonates between us, though it is tangled with grief and betrayal. I will not reject it outright, but I cannot embrace it fully either, not yet." Her heart twisted. She had not dared hope for acceptance so soon. Even this tentative acknowledgement felt like a small miracle. "I understand." He nodded, then beckoned to Brent, who came forward with a mixture of surprise and respect. "Take Helena to a safe place to rest," Xander instructed. "She is not our prisoner now. Tomorrow, we will decide how to proceed." Though Brent's eyebrows rose, he nodded. "Yes, Alpha." He looked at Helena with an air of reluctant acceptance. "Come on. I'll get you out of this chaos." She followed him, exhaustion weighing heavily on her. They ended up at a modest cabin near the orchard. Brent handed her a blanket and gestured to a small cot. "Sleep if you can. No locks this time." She sank onto the cot, tears threatening to overflow as she looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know I do not deserve kindness after everything I concealed." His expression remained cool, but he offered a grudging shrug. "You helped save the farmland and the Alpha's life. That counts for something. I still have my doubts, but maybe you are not like your father after all." She dropped her gaze. "I hope one day to prove that to everyone." He inclined his head, then left her alone. She curled under the blanket, her body battered and mind raw. The faint smell of charred wood drifted on the night breeze, a reminder of how close the pack had come to devastation. Malgrim was secured, and the farmland, though scarred, remained mostly intact. A fragile sense of peace wrapped the settlement, if only for a short while. Yet as she lay in the darkness, her thoughts circled back to Xander's wounded eyes, to the mate bond that neither of them could fully deny. The road ahead promised no easy resolution. She would face judgment from a pack whose greatest scar was inflicted by her father. Xander would wrestle with the contradiction of wanting to hate the child of his parents' killer, while feeling drawn to her by an unbreakable bond. But for the first time in her life, Helena felt the stirring of hope. She had walked through fire this night, literally and metaphorically, and had not emerged unscathed, but she was not utterly destroyed either. She did not know what the future held, only that she would not run from it any longer. If fate truly had chosen her to stand at the Alpha's side, she would strive to show everyone that her blood did not define her. She would work to mend the rifts, to atone for the sins of her heritage in whatever ways she could. In the silence, she closed her eyes, clinging to the small flame of possibility. Malgrim's threat had been quelled, and though his name still haunted her, she would not let his legacy condemn her to isolation. Somewhere beyond the swirl of turmoil, she felt the faint stirrings of a new life, one that might intertwine with the pack she had once feared. And perhaps, just perhaps, in time, the Alpha who had every reason to despise her would find a way to forgive and even to love.